Is this the campaign ordinance? Is that what you're referring to?
It's the ordinance.
I call the meeting to order. Good evening and welcome to the December 5th, 2023 business meeting of the Ashland City Council. Councillor Kaplan will offer the land acknowledgement.
We acknowledge and honor the Aboriginal people on whose ancestral homelands we work, the Ikarakoopsin Band of the Shasta Nation, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. We honor the first stewards in the Rogue Valley and the lands we love and depend on, tribes with ancestral lands in and surrounding the geography of the Ashland watershed include the original, past, present, and future indigenous inhabitants of the Shasta, Takelma, and Athabaskan people. We also recognize and acknowledge the Shasta village of Quakaka, where the crow lights that is now the Ashland City Plaza.
Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please, Alyssa.
Councillor Hyatt?
Here.
Bloom?
Here.
Dale?
Here.
Graham?
Here.
Kaplan?
Here.
Duquesne?
Here.
Hanson?
Here.
Thank you. Under Mayor's announcements, there are a couple of things that I want to speak to, but the first thing that we need to address is that tonight's meeting is going to have some very important topics and some topics that have a lot of emotion to it. As we head into that, it's important that we understand what the basic rules are. And one of the rules we have for this chamber is that we do not allow posters. And so while I recognize that folks have put energy and effort into the posters that I see here, they do need to be put away. The most important thing I want to express at this point is that we want to make sure that everyone who has come here this evening to speak to us is brought up at the correct time so that they can speak to the issue that they care about. So if you have not done this before, the way that you sign up to speak is that there are sign-up sheets along that back wall. You will fill them out and make sure that you put on there what you are here to speak to us about. There's a place on that form for public forum, and that is where you will mark your issue if what you have come to talk to us about is not on the agenda. If your item is on the agenda, then you will tell us what item that is, and that will allow us to bring you forward so that you can talk to the council at the time when on the issue that you have come here to speak about. There's a couple of additional items. I want to make sure everyone knows about the Sviatahirsk benefit that is coming up this Sunday. It is going to be at the Ashland Armory starting at 2:30. It's raising funds for our sister city, and it looks like we have some materials that are here as well to share about that. Hope to see as many folks out as can come and join us for that. I also have a statement in regard to the acts of violence and fear that we have seen around our community in this last bit of time, and I would like to share that at this point. It is the City of Peace statement that is on your agenda. Recent local and national acts of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia inflamed by the situation in Israel and Gaza calls us to decide how we will meet this moment as a city of peace. We know where hate leads. history has shown us time and again what happens when we let ourselves give in to the whispers of those who would turn us against one another. And I say we because being swept into the river of hatred is something we are all at risk of simply because we are human. It is not the domain of a particular person or group. It is something we all must consciously guard against because it can be infectious. Sorrow and despair are palpable in our world today, and appropriately so given what is happening internationally. We must acknowledge this reality and hold space for these feelings because it is during times of intense emotion that hate too often gains a foothold. While anti-Semitism is rearing its ugly head in the U.S., so too is Islamophobia. We have two groups of people who are increasingly fearful for their safety in their own communities. This is wrong, and we must do what is necessary to ensure that all people feel safe here in Ashland and across the Rogue Valley. Public statements like this are important because they allow us to speak as a community and denounce that which is immoral, but alone they are insufficient. It is not enough to speak with one collective voice. We must each take action in the situations we can touch in our daily lives. Many of us are already engaged in discussions as our community, our nation, and the world navigate the situation in Israel and Gaza. In these difficult discussions, we must do three things. First, we must check ourselves and the language we use. The words we choose matters. We are not born hateful. It is a process of becoming, and we can disrupt it. While it all too often culminates as a shout or an act of violence, hate begins as a whisper. It's a whisper that encourages us to abandon our better angels for simple answers to complex problems. Atrocities become possible only when we dehumanize one another, and that starts with creating the other. Turning another group of people into other is what first opens the door that leads to violence and terror. That process starts with one simple word: they. So as we are talking with friends and family about the international situation, let's pay attention to how we use the word they. What is the context? What are we saying about those people? Do our words lead to understanding, or do they take that first step towards dehumanizing our neighbor? Next, we need to look after our friends and family members who are also engaged in these conversations. If we begin to hear that language of they in a negative way, we must come alongside our friend or family member with love and gently remind them that the individuals that make up they are people just like us. They are mothers and fathers. They are someone's child. They are grandparents, sisters, brothers, and cousins. And they want for their families what we want for ours: safety, prosperity, and peace. Finally, if we know someone who has lost their way to the point where we believe they are in danger of becoming violent or acting in a way that instills fear, we must ask for help on their behalf. The Ashland Police Department works with agencies across the valley to address violence before it happens. You can reach out anonymously to let Chief O'Meara and his team know that your friend or loved one needs help before they do something they will regret. If you experience a hate-driven incident, please report it to the Ashland Police Department. It is the only way law enforcement can understand the full breadth of what is happening and take appropriate action. Please also report messages of hate and any efforts you see to recruit people to these organizations. The Oregon Bias Hotline is available at 844-924-2427 or online at standagainsthate.oregon.gov. This hotline is a particularly good way to report incidents that do not rise to the level of a crime, and it allows people to file reports anonymously. In 2017, Ashland declared itself a city of peace. It is in moments like this that we bring that declaration to life by making peace tangible for our neighbors, our friends, and our family members. While hatred may feel powerful, in reality it is cowardly. It is weak. And like so many other things that are cowardly and weak, it is also easy. It is, in fact, the easiest path. The moral path is what takes courage, the path that we navigate together by saying in these uncomfortable feelings of sorrow and despair, but remaining present and listening with an open heart to those who may have a different lived experience or perspective. We do not need to agree on the best way to bring this international conflict to an end, but we must protect one another in the discussion. Together, we must hold the space for these critically important conversations while holding the line against hatred in all its forms. I have faith that we can and will do this in our community because the people of Ashland, shoulder to shoulder with our neighbors across the Rogue Valley, are not afraid of that which requires courage when we know that it is in the service of that which we know to be honorable and right. Thank you. We will now move on to approval of minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes? No? The floor is open for a motion to approve. Councillor Hyatt.
I move approval of the minutes as presented in the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please. Alyssa?
Hyatt,
Yes.
Bloom,
Yes.
Dale,
Yes.
Kaplan,
Yes.
Duquesne,
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Great. I also want to report that prior to this meeting, we held an executive session to consider the employment of a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent pursuant to ORS 192.6602A. No decisions were made during that executive session. We move on now to the city manager report.
Thank you, Mayor. I just quickly wanted to highlight our beautification grants are out. These are grants that are using our transient lodging tax that will go directly to businesses for facade improvements. So all the information about the grants are on our website, including how to apply and the required documentation. And we hope that all businesses who are street fronting will apply. And we look forward to reviewing those applications. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have a question, Councillor Kaplan?
Yeah. Well, less a question, just to highlight the fact that we got the city manager's report in the packet, and I very much appreciate getting the written copy of that, and I appreciate city manager and staff that put that together. It's much more user-friendly than just getting a blast in this meeting. Thank you.
Absolutely. So credit goes to Dorinda for gathering all of this info and keeping me on track.
Great. Thank you.
We are now to the public forum. We have 3 speakers for public forum. When your name is called, please come up 2 by 2. We only have 3 people today, but we want to keep this moving as quickly as we can. Each person will have 3 minutes. The first speaker is Pamela Joy, and then Scott Ploss, and then Paul Sheldon will be the third speaker. Please come to these 2 microphones in front here. Please get in nice and close where we can hear you. And Alyssa will give you a chime, a single chime when you have 20 seconds left. She'll give you a double chime when your time is up. Please finish your sentence at that point and complete your comments. Thank you.
Hi. First of all, thank you all for doing what you do so I don't have to do it and that I can do what I do. My name is Pamela Joy. I live on Walker Avenue. I've lived in Ashland for 31 years, and some of you know that for almost 29 of those years I've worked pretty much every day gathering food for the food bank and other organizations that help people in need, and also gathering other things, blankets, bedding, books, whatever. But I'm here tonight to speak about something that really distresses me and affects my health, which is the whole potential of growth in the telecommunications industry, the potential of 5G. I am electrosensitive, which means like right now being in this room, my heart beats irregularly and I get a little foggy. So I'll try to be clear. Why I come now is because there was a conference on Friday night at Wellsprings, and I'm sorry that all of you weren't there because there was a lot of good information. The information that really alarmed me was how incendiary, I guess I'll use the word, the telecommunication instruments like cell towers, even the little ones or big ones, are, that they can burst into flames. They're very much of a fire hazard. There was a report by a firefighter who is also a fire and safety consultant, who wrote a pamphlet which I'd like to send to all of you. And some of the examples of the fires that happened were, the most alarming to me was a cell tower that was on a light pole in a school track, very much similar to the one that was proposed for the track here at SOU, and it burst into flames. They're not sure why. These telecommunication devices cannot be put out like regular fires, because if you put hoses and water on them, people can be electrocuted. So you have to wait until the electricity is all turned off. And in the 20 minutes that they were waiting, the fire got so hot that it melted the pole. I mean, it was like thousands of degrees of heat. It melted the pole and collapsed on the stadium, the bleachers, and the track. There are many other examples. If you go online, you can find it. And I really encourage you to do your homework and read these two books, which are based on facts about what happens to the human body and to the environment when there is this density of electromagnetic frequency invading us. Thank you. Was that my time? That was my time.
Thank you.
Way past
You
my
chimed twice.
Oh,
Oh, please, I just want to remind the audience that this is a formal public meeting, and so we do not have clapping or any noise from the audience. If you have not signed up to speak, please, there is still time to do that. Thank you, Ms. Joy.
I'm up?
Yes.
Great, okay. Scott Ploss, I'm an electrical contractor. I want to address some of the issues that Pamela talked about. I was at the meeting as well. I've been an electrician for about 27 years. For about 15 years, I didn't believe in the EMF issue at all. In fact, I actually got into the field of EMF remediation because I wanted to prove somebody wrong, because I was the expert. I have the pieces of paper, I have the certificates from Oregon and other states saying I'm smart. And that person proved me wrong. She was able to sense the fields, and I was able to verify that with separate meters. So that sort of was a watershed moment for me, where I found out that all of my training was incorrect. What Pam was talking about was the safety of the towers and the difficulty in putting them out, since an electrical fire cannot be put out with pretty much anything. You have an arcing current; it just continues to flow and continues to burn as long as electricity is there. So with new cell towers, with any cell tower, there's a significant safety issue and there's a significant fire issue. One of the towers that Pam was talking about caused over $6 billion worth of damage. 295,000 people were supposed to be evacuated because of a cell tower failure and failure of grounding that wasn't maintained by the telecom industry. So there's a significant concern. We've just had the Alameda fire just a few years ago. We're still not fully recovered from that. It started about 2 blocks from my house, and I'm really concerned about that. We're very lucky the entire town of Ashland did not burn, because there was that other fire on the other end of town. So to reintroduce a significant fire risk and a life safety risk in areas where there are children, there are people, residential areas, schools, and things like that, is very concerning to me. And I'd like to see if you have the ability to write rules and regulations legislating safety in Ashland, okay, because you're not supposed to be able to address this health issues. That's another story. But you have the ability to do safety-wise, so you can set the safety standards. There's a person, Andrew Campanelli, they're talking about that and writing the regulations for that. I'd love it if you would look at that and take that into account when writing new cell regulations and cell tower regulations. Additionally, Ashland is looking to get the fiber going, 100% fiber, and they're talking about rolling out a system to do the 500 homes up above Grant Street. Is that correct? Is this a one-way conversation?
I'm sorry.
Oh.
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, that's unusual. Okay, so with fiber optics being rolled out throughout the city, the need for cell towers everywhere is not very great. We have fiber optics are significantly safer for both hacking and also, radio frequency hacking. Well, thank you very much. That was a lovely sound. And I'm good.
Okay, you still had 20 seconds.
Oh, darn. Okay. So I think fiber optic is the way to go, and you do have the ability to, again, legislate safety here, and you can make your own safety rules here to deal with this issue that really isn't addressed at all. And now, am I done now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. No salivating?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul Sheldon, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the time. Thank you very much, Mayor, for your peace declaration. Your leadership is deeply appreciated. I'm a member of the planning group for the Ashland Świętokiersk Sister City program, which you all declared, and I just want to let you know it's going really well. We had a great concert in August. We raised some money. Because of that, we were able to contract to have 150 new windows installed in a building in Świętokiersk in the name of Ashland. When the bombing happens and the missiles hit, a lot of windows get blown out. They also have a lot of glass from that is not destroyed, so we also bought them a glass cutting table, which they can use to recycle glass from damaged buildings to make new windows. So we're making progress, and as the mayor said, we have another benefit concert happening on Sunday. I have flyers for you. Is it permissible for me to bring them to you, or?
I think Alyssa can bring them to
I'll
us.
give them to Alyssa. And I just appreciate all the work that you folks do. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We will now move on to the consent agenda. Would any counselor like to remove any item from the consent agenda? Counselor Dale?
No.
Oh, okay.
Just ready to make a motion.
Any removals? Okay, the floor is open for a motion to accept the consent agenda. Counselor Dale?
Move to accept the consent agenda as listed.
Okay. Alyssa, roll call, please.
Bloom,
Yes.
Dale,
Yes.
Kaplan,
Yes.
Duquesne,
Yes.
Hanson,
Yes.
Hyatt.
Yes.
We move now to the first of two public hearings. The first one is the public hearing and first reading of Ordinance 3229, amending Ashland's parking standards. This item is a public hearing and first reading, amending Ashland's parking standards to comply with state requirements under the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules by removing parking mandates citywide. I'll now open the public hearing. The City Council previously discussed this item at the October 17th study session. It has subsequently had a hearing before the Ashland Planning Commission on November 14th and was considered by the Transportation Committee on November 16th. Their recommendations are included in your packets. As this is a legislative matter, there is no need to declare ex parte contact. I'll first call up the planning staff to make a brief presentation on this item. Brandon, Derek?
Thank you, Mayor Graham and Council. Brandon Goldman, Community Development Director. To my left is Derek Severson, Planning Manager. We do have a brief presentation. The Council is familiar with this project in that you reviewed it at your October 17th study session. Subsequent to that, the Planning Commission has held a public hearing on November 14th and adopted findings in support of the parking reform package presented to you before on November 28th. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Derek to talk about this project in the state mandated portion, because we are doing parking reforms, many of which are required by the state of Oregon as part of the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking. But using this opportunity, we also looked at our existing parking and access management standards and did some house cleaning. And so that was also reviewed by the Planning Commission, and I'll touch on that part after Derek gives you a general overview.
So these are the parking amendments before you are coming out of some state adopted rules called the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Rulemaking. They were adopted by the Land Conservation and Development Commission in July of 2022, and they're really aimed at promoting climate-friendly and equitable urban development and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Statewide implementation began in January of 2023, and that implementation was phased in through a number of areas, and you've seen those a number of times. This particular one has to be completed and adopted by the city by December 31st of this year. And really the options before the city are to select one of three options from a menu that the state has provided with the new rules. And those options, option one, which is the staff recommendation here, and the way the ordinance is drafted, is repealing parking mandates citywide. The other option, and I should back up, the first phase of these rules was to eliminate parking requirements within a half mile of transit. That takes out about 80% of the city area from any parking rules. The remaining 20% has very limited development potential. If we wanted to maintain parking mandates in that remaining 20%, it would require following either option 2 or option 3 here, which are fairly complex and involved versus just repealing the parking mandates. So again, staff's recommending option 1. The climate-friendly and equitable community rules aim to help local governments create climate-friendly areas, that's mixed-use pedestrian-friendly areas where there's more housing and transportation choice, to sort of get away from our continued reliance on the single-family or single-occupant automobile, and get us more in line with the 2050 climate pollution reduction targets. So some of the steps involved are eliminating parking minimums and setting maximum parking allowances, which is before you tonight, as well as mandating bike parking spaces based on development type, including addressing cargo bikes and bicycle parking graphics, updates to, again, provide standards for more types of non-automotive vehicles, requiring multifamily developments to provide conduit to serve electric vehicle charging stations, and then also establishing some tree canopy coverage and landscaping requirement for parking lots. Eliminating those parking mandates is intended to increase mobility and reduce congestion, and by doing that, then again promoting alternative transportation modes in particularly climate-friendly areas, and also adjusting the way we do some transportation planning to emphasize all modes of transportation versus just the automobile. In doing that, it's intended to address housing costs and affordability by kind of removing the potential for parking requirements and then allowing reduction in development costs to be translated to housing costs, and then also environmental benefits from denser, more walkable cities and reducing emissions and improving air quality.
So that covers essentially what the state mandates require of the ordinance, and which is presented in the ordinance 3229 that you're reviewing tonight. Additionally, although the climate-friendly and equitable communities did not make these requirements, in reviewing our parking code and amendments, some issues arose, namely the first being that the CFEC requirement says that somebody can voluntarily provide no parking. Our concern in reviewing that was that in the event a commercial development proposed to provide no parking, that would also mean there was no parking available for accessibility or for people with disabilities. And as such, the Planning Commission recommended that the ordinance include that at least one ADA accessible parking space be provided in developments where no other parking is proposed. I will note that in the case that a development does propose to provide parking voluntarily, the state requirements under the Building Codes Division for ADA parking would kick in. And so the proportional allocation that has long been the standard would still be in place. Additionally, the Planning Commission, in reviewing the establishment of a maximum parking allowance for developments that want to provide parking, felt that the standards for the maximum, which we've long had in our code, should have a threshold, a relief valve essentially, so that if there was a particular use that necessitated a greater number of parking spaces, that there was a path by which an applicant could propose a conditional use permit for review by the Planning Commission, and the public could speak to that at a public hearing. And so the ordinance before you does include a conditional use permit alternative, allowing applicants to request that when their demand exceeds the maximum permitted parking in the ordinance. Additionally, the City of Ashland has code language in our subdivision standard that stipulates that new lots created through a subdivision provide one on-street parking space per unit, and that would still remain in our code. That is not being proposed to change. However, it was recognized through recent planning actions that where that street frontage that would otherwise require on-street parking is outside the City of Ashland's jurisdiction, for instance, regulated by ODOT or the county, that the city didn't have the ability to impose that requirement, and as such wanted to incorporate language in our code that clarified that association of on-street parking in subdivisions that front newly improved streets that are under county or state jurisdiction need not provide that on-street parking. The other areas that, again, are outside the CFEC requirements really relate to planning actions that the city has reviewed over the last decade that triggered variances and were supported by the Planning Commission, one being that driveways on lower order residential streets be separated by 24 feet for residential use, but we did have a standard stating that for property serving 3 or more units, those driveways be separated by at least 50 feet. But we have had cases where variances were readily supported to allow a 24-foot separation. So removing the requirement for 3 lot or more units to be separated by 20 or 50 feet is proposed in the ordinance. Additionally, we've seen applications where a corner lot had one driveway coming in on one street and going out on the other. And in those circumstances, our code says that those driveways have to be 20 feet to accommodate two-way traffic. But it's recognized that if they do have one way in and one way out, that a one-way traffic circulation could work. And so the proposal before you includes providing amendments to allow for one-way vehicular circulation. And lastly, a maximum grade for flag drives. It's a rare change or a rare application, but for long driveways and steep slopes, we had a code provision, or currently do, that states that you can't exceed 15% slope for more than 200 feet. And there was question as to whether that was 200 continuous feet, or could you do 100 feet and then a gap and another 100 feet? The Planning Commission recently passed a variance for that, that areas that are, they need not be concurrent. You could, so long as additively you don't have more than 200 feet of steep slope, steep driveway, that would be acceptable. So utilizing the language from that application and variance that was approved by the Planning Commission, again, we've made a proposed change in this ordinance to codify that. And lastly, I did want to reiterate that the City Council did unanimously recommend that the Council approve Ordinance 3229 as presented. They did make some modifications that are actually included in the draft that's in your packet for consideration tonight, namely the accessibility parking requirement that I mentioned previously. Within the downtown area, we've never required any parking. And so imposing a requirement on buildings that are built from lot line to lot line that they newly provide one accessible parking space would be problematic in creating non-conforming situations. So the Planning Commission recommended that be exempted from the ADA parking requirement, which is presented in the application. And lastly, we heard testimony at the Planning Commission meeting, and there is public comment in your record that relates to an interest in evaluating unbundling parking, which is really separating the cost of parking from the cost of housing in a residential environment where somebody would rent the house and rent the parking space separately. And that is in that state mandate under option 2, were the city to have not eliminated parking requirements citywide in this proposed ordinance, we would have been looking at unbundling parking as one of those 3 of 5 alternatives that they stipulate for option 2. The Planning Commission, although it's not included in this option, felt that it merited further discussion, and as such have requested that staff bring that back to them at a study session to further evaluate. But I did want to clarify that it's not in the code as presented to you this evening. And as mentioned, tonight is public hearing and first reading. And Derek and I are here to take any questions before you open it up for public comment.
Councilors, any questions for staff? We've had quite a conversation about this earlier in the first conversation. Yeah, Councilor Hanson.
Thanks, Mayor. And thank you, Derek. And thank you, Brandon. I think these are great steps towards better livability in Ashland. My biggest question was staff recommends option 1. I get that. Totally makes sense. But then I got confused just now with the unbundling part because I've heard this brought up many times before. So if in the due diligence of staff and investigation, if we move to approve first reading, I take it this is going to be included and addressed in second reading then?
No. So as presented tonight, first reading does not address unbundling as an option. Staff's concern with unbundling is that it would not just apply to new developments, but would retroactively apply to all development within the city. We would have to send notice to all property owners in the city that they would have to redo their lease agreements with their tenants.
And then deed and title parking places?
Correct, potentially, and if they were doing it in form of easement that could be rented separately. There's a lot of nuance to how that would be carried out and administered, as well as administrative burden, for lack of a better term, to monitor that over time. If the city were to establish a minimum amount for how much a parking space could rent for, which is what the state's guidance identifies, were the city to have selected option 2, that again would have to be a regulatory approach that has not been examined fully. It is not prepared to come back at second reading with this ordinance.
Okay, so follow-up question. Yes. Do staff still recommend option 1 then?
Yeah, both staff and the Planning Commission have recommended option 1 for approval as presented this evening.
Okay. And also, could you go back to the first slide, please?
Yeah.
The very intro slide. Our Transportation Advisory Committee, the one of the graphic, noted that this is one of the most interesting AI interpretations of a transportation graphic. The almost perfect bikes, it was Nick that pointed this out. The almost perfect bicycles, but not quite.
Yeah.
Very interesting graphics. Thanks
True
for
with
playing
all
with
AI.
those.
It's never quite perfect.
Councilor Kaplan.
Yes, thanks. Just briefly following up on Councilor Hanson's questions, what I understood is that the Planning Commission asked staff to bring back at some future date some analysis of the unbundling option, and that's what you're doing.
Correct. So it would not be done in this application. Again, the state requirement was that we have to either adopt the repeal of parking mandates by December 31st, or alternatively enact 3 of the 5 options listed in option 2 by December 31st of this year. All the work to date has been on the option 1, the repeal citywide.
Yeah, I understand. So we may see it sometime in the future once it's fully analyzed. Thank you.
Okay, we have one person who has signed up to speak on this matter. I will now call forward Gary Schaff, who has requested to speak, and if staff will be calling you back up here in just a moment. Mr. Schaff, you have 5 minutes. And please make sure you get in close to that microphone so we can hear you.
Thank you. Good evening. As it turns out, I have a concern about the parking ordinance. More specifically, section 18.3.9.060, subsection A. And that provision requires, in certain circumstances, that the developer provide on-street parking. And our experience, or your experience and your decision most recently to eliminate parking on North Mountain as a part of its rehabilitation project causes me to be somewhat concerned in that if a person is required to have a on-street parking spot as a part of the city's administration of its subdivision ordinance, does that parking then create a vested interest or a pseudo property right? And I have no idea. But it is a concern largely because, again, most of these would be local streets, but we may find as we go forward that there are opportunities for traffic calming, which may in fact modify the curb line and eliminate parking spaces in an effort, again, to reduce the speed of traffic and improve the environment for bicycling and walking. So that's my concern, and I, again, don't have any insight into how that would be resolved, but I would encourage the council to either ask your attorney or your planning staff how they see that happening. The other thing is a recommendation, and it's related to unbundling parking, which isn't before you tonight. But I would encourage you to ask not only the Planning Commission, but also the Climate Environment Policy Advisory Committee, the Social Justice Committee, and the Housing Committee to serve jointly on a task force that would review that approach, because it's not just a planning policy. There are implications of unbundling that I think in general are quite positive in all those areas. And I think it would be important for you as the council to get input from all of those through the creation of a joint task force to look at unbundling parking. Thank you, and thank you for your very diligent work.
Thank you. Mr. Schaff, just to hold on just a moment. Are there any questions of our speaker before he departs the microphone? Okay, thank you.
Thank you again.
Brandon and Derek, if you could come back. And I wonder if you might address Mr. Schaff's first question.
Yeah, so the first question related to the requirements that have long been within our ordinance, that when a new subdivision is developed, that for each lot that is created, there be provided one on-street parking space, 2 off-street parking spaces for a single-family home. Through going through removing all parking mandates, it does refer to the on-site 2 parking spaces would no longer be required. From staff's assessment, the impact of that is not that cars go away, but there might be a greater reliance for on-street parking spaces. And so through the revision of this ordinance, we did not contemplate removing the on-street parking requirements that are currently in the code. In terms to his question of the implications as to whether there's a vested right for holding that property, we would have a planning action that was approved on file, defining the street improvement to show those parking spaces on site, and if there was a proposal to remove those parking spaces in order to accommodate an alternative use, whether that's a bike parking or a bike lane, that may require a modification of the prior subdivision if those streets were installed as part of that planning action. If they are just available on-street existing parking spaces, I think there might be an ability to interpret, and I'm somewhat looking at legal, but we'd have to review it with an individual planning action, that those parking spaces were public and pre-existing, not installed by the applicant that was building them, and as such, that might eliminate any vested right for their future use. So I don't know if that fully answers the question. I think it would take further evaluation to determine on a case-by-case basis.
Any final questions of staff?
I've got one more, Mayor.
Councilor Hanson.
I appreciate you coming back because I'm now restuck on the unbundling. So moving forward with this ordinance, at what point would we be able to revisit the unbundling and implement it in the future?
So it would be a new ordinance in order to implement unbundling parking in the future. So it would be If determined to move forward with an ordinance, if the Planning Commission in review at their study session directed staff to begin development of an ordinance, or if the City Council, who also has that authority, directed staff to develop an ordinance to unbundle parking, then that would be, in terms of the when, it would have to be determined as far as in the line of other legislative amendments that the Long Range Planning Division is bringing forward, where would that fit in? I can say that it would not likely be in the immediate future, as we're currently working on climate-friendly areas and a couple master plans that are already in the pipeline and would take precedence. But it would have to come back before the Planning Commission and the City Council as a separate independent ordinance. And as part of that, I would note that we would want to send a direct mail to every property owner within the city that was affected by that change, so that they could weigh in on it as well.
So I'm hearing that if the committees and the departments involved recommended this, it would be after much due diligence, and then even after that, there would be issuing of public notices and legal, and we're looking at a year or so or more, and there's probably not a current development need or crisis to push any of that through.
Well, I would note there's no development pressure to trigger a need for it, but there is obviously an interest in terms of reducing the impact on housing costs that the parking provides. The adoption of option 1 under the state mandates was intended to remove all parking requirements, and as such satisfy that there need not be any parking provided, and therefore currently somebody could unbundle parking. An apartment complex could charge rent and a parking space rent separately if that was in their lease agreement. It's just not required by our code or mandated by the city. As part of that due diligence, one of the concerns that we would have to investigate in talking to those committees that Mr. Schaff recommended is the implication on affordability. If somebody has a market rate rent and it can only go up so much per year under state law, and they sever that from the parking space, they may be able to charge that maximum rent for the unit and now charge additionally for the parking space. That's clearly a disincentive to having a vehicle or getting a parking space, but it may have a burden on the very properties, the very tenant households that we're looking to ensure that they don't incur additional costs.
Okay.
So that's.
And one more quick question. Is the state looking for Ashland to adopt an ordinance under the CFEC rules with a timeline or a deadline? I forget.
Yeah, so many of these rules are already in place. The state approved them, and they went into effect on January 1st of 2023, and we've not been requiring parking. The state at that point said that you have to adopt standards in your local code reflecting either option 1, 2, or 3 by June of 2023. We requested a 6-month extension, so we have until December 31st of 2023 to adopt the code standards that are presented before you.
Thank you.
Any final questions? Okay. I will now close the public hearing and the record. The floor is open for a motion. Councillor Hansen.
I'd like to make a motion. Do we really need to read all these numbers?
Yes, you do.
Okay, here we go. Hold on, folks. I move to approve first reading of Ordinance 3229, an ordinance amending the Ashland Land Use Ordinance to remove automobile parking mandates and amend parking standards set forth in Ashland Municipal Code sections 18.22, 18.2.3, 18.314, 18.32, 18.34, 18.3.5, 18.3.9, 18.4.2, 18.4.3, 18.4.4, 18.4.6, 18.5.2, 18.5.3, 18.5.4, 18.5.5, and 18.5.6, and to schedule a second reading on December 19th, 2023.
And we have a second with Councillor Hyatt. Councillor Hansen, would you care to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you. The climate-friendly, equitable community rules, I believe, are made for a town like Ashland. And I'm excited that we're prioritizing equitable climate-friendly policies, especially with regards to new developments. And I think the overarching goal of reducing our own community's carbon footprint while increasing affordability in Ashland is key to our community-identified goals. And I applaud staff for really taking the time to do this right. And I look forward to hearing about the unbundling of parking and how that might be furthering our goals. But for the meantime, I think it's appropriate to move this forward. And I look forward to more climate-friendly options for Ashlanders.
Councillor Hyatt?
Thank you, Mayor. Happy to second this, first and foremost, because it complies with state law, but also because it supports climate goals, walkability, urban density. It goes directly to our economic development. It can decrease housing costs, given that parking does contribute to the inflation of those costs. And I also want to take a moment to thank both staff and the Planning Commission, especially for the catch on the ADA access piece. I think that was really vital and an integral add to this work, and I know that the Planning Commission studied this intently, so I want to thank them as well for a job well done.
Any further comments or discussion? Councillor Kaplan.
Yeah, I'll also be supporting this, and I want to thank the staff for being attentive to taking the opportunity not just to do what the state required, but also to look at the broader picture and make additional adjustments that I think serve our interests. So thank you very much.
Roll call, please, Alyssa.
Dale,
Yes.
Kaplan,
Yes.
Duquesne,
Yes.
Hanson,
Yes.
Hyatt,
Yes.
Bloom,
Yes.
motion passed.
Thank you. And thank you, Brandon and Derek, for bringing us that information. We now move on to the second hearing for the evening. The first reading of the prohibited camping ordinance 3228. And as the staff is preparing to start this conversation, I want to say a couple of things about this issue. This is clearly why this room is full this evening. And it is full because this is an important issue, and it's something that many people care about. And because of that, when we care about things very strongly, that's the time when it is the most important that we are careful in how we treat each other. There are different opinions in this room this evening. And what we are here to do this evening as a council is to move our way through this in a way that gets us to the best possible outcome. Part of that is hearing what people have come here to share with us, and that means that everyone in this room is part of holding that space so that people are respected in sharing their opinion. As staff is preparing their presentation, I also want to explain what the order of business will be for this. So staff is going to take us through this proposed ordinance to give councilors an opportunity to ask questions about different aspects of it. I will then call forward the folks who have signed up to speak to this issue and provide guidance about how you do that in case this is your first time speaking to council. Once that is complete, we will call the staff back up for any remaining questions from our council. And then I will ask to go around the council, go around the horn here, and to find out from councilors what they're seeing as the pathway they would like this council to take. And then I will open the floor for a motion. One of the things that a couple of people have written in wondering where this came from, and I just want to give a little bit of that backstory. So many of you will know that over the past year or so, this council has done a significant amount of work in terms of partnering with local organizations to provide additional services for our unhoused neighbors. We are, and you'll see later on in the agenda, we're still working on the shelter goals for the new shelter that the city was able to purchase with state funding. We've also made sure that we have funding in the budget to make sure we can manage the severe weather shelter that opens up when it is too hot, too cold, or too smoky. And we have provided the dawn to dusk camp space here behind the council chambers. Those are just some of the things that the council has done in order to address the programmatic element of this and how do we help people get back on their feet. And so in that work, there has been a lot of discussion about the changes to what is allowed in terms of camping that have come from a couple of court rulings and also some legislative action at the state level. And so recognizing that our existing ordinance, which is many years old, was now not in alignment with those changes, that is why we're having this conversation this evening. That's why staff has gone through the process of looking to see what aligns with current law and rulings and what does not. So that's the backstory for how we have gotten to this point this evening. And with that, I will pass it over to our legal team to walk us through the ordinance. And counselors, just as you have questions, just please get my attention and we'll stop as we go.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a good explanation, Mayor. We're just going to, Carmel and I are just going to go over those changes to the original ordinance. Again, as you mentioned, it's an ordinance that's been around probably over since the beginning of the city, but it's through different iterations. But here we are now making these most recent changes. So we start with the definitions. Those really are the most kind of, if there's any time to be spent, it's with these definitions that kind of sets the stage for the rest of the ordinance. And the reason we do that, why we get our definitions together first, is that for these, we need to, in many respects, need to establish what is, in fact, some of the different terms that we are using in the ordinance that are new, that are presented and are created really by the court rulings that and the new areas of court rulings and state laws. So when we get our definitions, and once they're established, this gives the city control over defining now those terms that the state and courts have not defined for us. And instead of having some tribunal making up what those terms mean for us, it's better for us to get the terms together now, so that when it's to define those for as opposed to some tribunal define them to our detriment. I mean, it's something that we wouldn't want as opposed to something that we would want. With that started, I should say. We start with the apparent value or utility. We added this item. This relates to the property disposal, if in fact what the statutes do. Yes.
Mr. McGarry, Councilor Kaplan has a question. Go ahead.
I do. Thanks, Mayor. I do have a question. Doug, you started, going through right to the definitions, but there's actually some preamble to this that has some substantive language in it that I'd like to just ask about, if I may, before we get to the definition.
It's entirely up to you. We kind of got our deal down to about 6 minutes if we could do that, yeah. but you go ahead and make your.
Yeah. So I'm interested in the final whereas clause, part of the preamble, that talks about involuntary homeless. And then it says, the second of two sentences, says the objective of this ordinance is to differentiate between those who genuinely lack alternatives and use public spaces out of necessity, and those who have access to suitable alternative spaces and shelter, but instead willfully exploit public spaces for personal gain or advantage to the detriment of the general public. That includes the involuntarily homeless population. So my question really is, in what is this sentence really a necessary part of this ordinance? And I don't follow the logic, frankly, that the rest of the ordinance, that the rest of the ordinance fulfills this objective of differentiating between those who generally lack alternatives and those who do. Maybe you could explain the intent in putting that specific sentence into this ordinance.
Okay. When you're the ordinance as it is now, without being changed at all, just prevents anyone from camping. So it doesn't really matter whether or not the person has a lifestyle, wants to live on your property, or lives on the state's property or the city's property. That's their lifestyle choice, or if that's what they want to do, then that is something in which you can allow them to do or not allow them to do. And in this case, what you're trying to do is you're trying to differentiate behavior from a person's status or condition. And so in order for the ordinance to operate, we're talking here about as opposed to conflating what is homelessness and that issue with behavior, what you're trying to do is trying to deal with the behavior that you're trying to prevent. And so what you're trying to prevent is someone having occupancy exclusively for their own good to the detriment of everyone else. And so that's kind of a 30,000-foot look view as to what the objective of the ordinance is. So I'm not sure what part you don't what part's not understood about that, other than it is a ordinance that prevents camping that is not permitted. And the type of camping that's not permitted is basically on a behavior issue, not on whether or not someone, not on whether someone's status, which is something that we want to address, but we don't want to punish.
So I guess you ask what I'm.
Hold on just a second, Councillor Kaplan. That will not do. This is a formal public meeting, and there will not be that kind of exclamations from the crowd. That is not how this works. Councillor Kaplan.
Thank you. So here it says clearly the objective of this ordinance is to differentiate. So it doesn't say, in responding to my question, you said that the ordinance is intending to say that camping is not a behavior that's allowable. But that's not what this sentence says. This sentence doesn't say that's what the objective of this ordinance is. This sentence says the objective of this ordinance is to differentiate between these two different kinds of people.
What the city does not want to do is it does not want to punish persons who are involuntarily homeless. All right, that's number one. Number two is it wants to be able to enforce a prohibited camping from people using the public space for camping. Now, how you do that? There's only one way you can do that, and that's differentiating between behavior and status. And so that is the objective. We are designed this ordinance so that it's not punishing people. It is differentiating those persons who are homeless, that we want to protect, that we want to be able to help, versus those persons who, as a decision, not of their own, as a decision of their own, for their own personal viewpoint or their own personal gain, are using the taxpayer and the public's property. And if that's what the city wants to do, is to allow everyone to just take public property and use it as their own, I don't think that is what the city is intending to do, and that's what we're trying to differentiate.
So let me follow up. I think I have something that might help us here. Mr. McGarry, when I see this ordinance, I don't see a different pathway in any of the regulations of it based on whether somebody is voluntarily or involuntarily homeless. So I'm wondering if is there a legal problem with taking the whole reference to involuntary out of this ordinance?
Okay, there is. There's two different aspects to the involuntarily, and that's not to say that you can't take out that term. One is you take out the involuntarily homeless definition, and you take that out of what we would call the element of the offense. That's one less element that the city has to prove. I don't have to prove involuntarily homeless. Okay, I can show that the person simply is in a place that they're not supposed to be, and they have an alternative. We can go there. Okay. They will always have a defense, however, to say, well, I was involuntarily homeless, and so therefore I had a right to be where I wanted to be. Now, that could come up, and that could be an issue that comes up. But if you take that definition out, we wouldn't have to be dealing with that issue as a general rule. No one would have to have that element, or we would not be looking at that element. So that goes into the actual prosecution of the ordinance. On a civil end of the things, where someone is challenging the ordinance on a civil matter, and I can tell you that there's going to be, every single city in the Ninth Circuit is going through this right now. Every city is coming up with new different kinds of ordinances to make sure that they're in compliance with federal law. And in the state of Oregon, the new House bills that came through, and I'm not going to explain those, but those are all experiments that each of these cities are doing. This is one, and we're patterning ourselves after each other, doing the best we can. But the fact is that could be challenged civilly. Any one of our ordinances could be challenged civilly. So when we define what involuntarily homeless is, then we have a better position civilly to protect our ordinance. That is from civil litigation. That is, we need to, at that point, make a determination as to whether someone was in fact involuntary, or were they voluntary, and does this ordinance apply to them on a civil matter, or does it not? Now, the distinction, however, is and I understand the chief of police, and we've talked about this. He does not want, and I understand that, he does not want to have his law enforcement going in and having to ask the backstory of every person that might come along, and in order to make that decision, he would rather his team would, if that decision has to be made, would be look if there's an alternative site. If you don't do that, I don't care whether you're involuntary or voluntary. You just go to that site, and if you don't, then that's a problem, and that's an offense. From the attorney standpoint, for me, I like to have all that information up front, and I would like to have it, at the very time that it happens, not in some deposition later on as to whether or not someone was homeless or not homeless. That's in the perfect world, and I understand that. So from a practical standpoint, it's probably you don't need to have the term involuntarily homeless. If you just, from a practical enforcement standpoint, I understand where the chief is from. From my standpoint, I'm looking at it from what would I like to have if I ever needed to protect this ordinance. This ordinance may never be challenged. So to the extent that it's probably more often going to be the chief's position would more likely be the case where you would have it doesn't matter whether or not you're involuntarily homeless or not. We're just giving you the alternative to be at this other's place, and that solves the federal concerns as well, actually, to some degree.
Councilor Bloom?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I mean, to Councilor Kaplan's point, it's pretty clear to me, the second line, the second sentence starting there, the objective of the ordinance is to differentiate between those who generally lack alternatives and use public spaces out of necessity, and those that have alternative spaces. Let's take for an example, I mean, there's a perfect example of regulating behavior instead of status, right? So, let's take my situation. I'm blessed to have a small apartment here in Ashland. If I decided to just go ahead and go down to Triangle Park and set up a big encampment and essentially, prevent anybody from being able to use that park, what right do I have? I would be in violation of this ordinance. My status would be technically housed, so what right do I have to take up that public space? So I think that part is pretty clear and speaks to the fact that this is about regulating behavior and not status. And secondly, I would...
Councilor Bloom, do you have a question for staff?
I don't.
Okay, well, that's where we're at the point where we're asking questions of staff. Okay, any other questions in the lead-in, in the whereases?
I do.
Councilor Hanson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. McGarry, riddle me this. Are these definitions that you're going to get to that are used in this beginning, whereas that Councilor Kaplan was just discussing, are these terms and definitions that have been very, very concretely identified by the courts, or is this City of Ashland Legal Department's interpretation and assignment of words to terms?
Okay.
So is this our own Ashland-baked experiment, as you
No.
just
The
expressed other communities are doing?
The involuntarily homeless is language directly out of the federal court.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. The apparent value or utility, the actual words are from House Bill, was it 113 or House Bill?
3115.
Yeah, thank you, 3115. Apparent value or utility, and they don't give any definition for that. And that's why I would say, and if I may, then I would just start going down through definitions.
Okay,
May I?
yes. I was just curious.
The apparent value or utility isn't defined. And what does that mean? So if we're taking someone's property away from them, what does they say? Well, you have to hold property with apparent value or utility. I know that the city isn't capable. They would have to buy a storage unit complex in order to start filling all the people's. If you started having to store everything that someone thought had apparent value or utility.
I was just asking about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And if I may, I'll just go ahead and start going down. But that's a good, I want those kinds of questions, because we came up with what we believe to be a definition that if it was challenged, a court would have to say this definition is unreasonable, as opposed to the court saying, well, I think apparent value and utility means this. I would rather put the definition down so that the court then has to look at our definition to say, is this unreasonable definition? It's like in a football game, I'm sorry, but in a football game where the players are making the rules versus the rules already being set forth and saying, okay, this is what the rules are. So apparent value is what we believe to be a reasonable explanation of what what you would do, what property you would be required to keep, and then you'll see later on in the ordinance the process by which someone can challenge whether or not their property fits this definition or does not fit this definition. Okay?
Councilor Bloom has a question.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yes.
I mean, sorry, Councilor Dale.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Okay. I understand that definitions are static in nature, and those are designed in order to be able to create and affect some sort of application.
Yes.
Correct? Right. And in order to apply that, we need to task people with enforcing and making decisions in real-time context relative to how to apply those. Correct?
Yes.
And those decisions could be challenged, possibly like any other decision. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if the intent, as you said, is behavior, not status. If these definitions were to hypothetically be deleted, would the same application and execution still be affected through this ordinance? Would you still get the same result?
If you had
this ordinance is designed to affect a certain behavior change.
Right.
If you didn't have those, would we still be able to arrive at the same spot?
In this case, the apparent value or utility, for instance, doesn't really deal with behavior. It's what that deals with is once a person's property is essentially, I mean, if they leave it after they've gotten a citation, or they've gotten a citation and if this is the fourth citation for a ordinance, or for this ordinance violation, they could criminally be, cited, or they could be custodially arrested. So if that's the case, you're now left with all this property. So this apparent value or utility isn't necessarily dealing with their behavior. It's dealing with what the city's responsibility is for someone's property that's being left or has been given our responsibility to store. Now, the next parts, like involuntarily homeless, yes, that would distinguish between behaviors, but we don't need that term.
So what we're looking at here is simply the definitions, because this is referred to later in the ordinance.
It is referred to later in the ordinance.
And so this would be a guidance to law enforcement to say, well, as you're distinguishing with this property, these are the things that would go in the pile that we keep for this person.
Right.
And these are the elements that would be discarded.
Yeah, and to add in, more importantly, the judge at the end of the day, if there's an appeal, that the judge looks at the definition.
Yes, and we will get to all of what to do with the property. It's a little bit later in the process. So anything else as we're moving through the definitions about that particular issue? Okay, carry on.
Okay, so then the next one is established.
Established campsite. This is an important definition because it triggers ORS 195505. And so if a campsite is established, then law enforcement has to give a 72-hour posting. And so it's a definition that is important because it affects basically how fast or not fast the speed at which a campsite is removed. And so right now we have a 5-day established campsite to be 5 days. There's no definition in the statute for what an established campsite is. The legislative research I did also didn't have a strong indication one way or the other, so it'll be a reasonableness factor. And so we also looked at some of the regional standards, and Medford is 5 days. Another suggestion would be 3 days, which is 3 days. The idea for that is mimicking the 3 days of a posting, 3 days of a established campsite. But again, it's a reasonableness factor.
It's also, if you think about it, it's if you're in a city like Portland or San Francisco or Los Angeles, you would never know how long a particular campsite was there because there's so many of them. Police officers wouldn't ever know how many. But in our city, we're small enough, they would be seen and known to be how long anyone. So you could have it 3 days or you could have it 5 days. But as long as, law enforcement could be able to look at it and say, all right, you've been here for 3 days or 5 days, you need to leave, as opposed to, again, we're not overwhelmed. I know there's a lot of, camping, but we're not overwhelmed like some big cities where they could be somewhere in the months, where you wouldn't know it.
Councilor Bloom?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and just to be clear, House Bill 3124 says 72 hours. So by us going 5 days, we're actually extending out and providing even more leeway. Is that correct?
72 hours to, once you're established, then it takes 72-hour notice for you to leave. So we're saying that if a campsite was, what we were having problems before when this all started happening was the idea that established could be as soon as you put your first pole up, now you've got your established. So they could just move to the next site immediately, they could wait 3 days, move to the next site, put their tent up, and then we'd have to wait another 3 days. So in this case, we're saying that after 5 days, you can't, you've got 3 days, but up until 5 days, we say leave, you leave. You don't get 3 days. If it's up to, if it's a day 2 that you've got your camp, not quite established yet, but up, that doesn't matter. You need to leave now, and you give enforcement.
And the purpose for the 72-hour notice was to, what was talked about in the legislature was that it's a humane way of letting people know this is a public space, you can't be here, but we're going to give you some time to pick up your things, and it gives law enforcement an opportunity to let social services know that there's a camp. And so if social services has the ability to staff with the removal of a campsite, then that it could be a step for connecting people for the first stage in getting out of homelessness.
Councilor Kaplan.
Yes, thanks. So the definition is of the established campsite. I'm curious about the relationship of an established campsite to camping, because as you rightly pointed out, it's not established until 5 days. And then somebody who is within an established campsite would have 3 days to remove it. They'd be posted for 3 days and have to remove it. So I'm wondering about the application of the prohibition is on camping in the next section. Does that apply upon the first encounter with a campsite, whether or not it's established, or is it only a prohibition on an established campsite?
The prohibition has to do with camping. The established part is how long do you have to give someone notice once they are established. And so camping is not permitted. Established camping is not permitted either, but with established camping, you would now have 3 days notice. So it includes both camping and established camping.
So
our ordinance does.
So at what point is it subject to a violation penalty?
It's subject at any point, but once it's established, then even though they have a violation, they're allowed to wait 3 days to get their property out.
Well,
it doesn't matter.
And I think to answer, so if law enforcement believes it's an established campsite, then they shouldn't post until, or it wouldn't be a violation until after the 3 days. And if it's still there and they're refusing to leave, then at that point.
I'm sorry, you're right.
Okay, can I repeat that so that I make sure that I understand?
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
I think what I heard was that if it is an established campsite, and I'll go to the other case as well, if it is an established campsite, then the police can post it, but the violation doesn't take hold until after it's the 3 days of required removal, because people have 3 days of grace or something.
Yes.
If it's not an established campsite, so if the police encounter a campsite, in less than 5 days, at what point does the violation take hold? Is it immediate, or because there's no grace period, is it an immediate removal, an immediate violation and removal?
Yes.
I think practically speaking, there's usually a warning, but yes.
And just so
technically,
I have you in the list, there will be an opportunity. I'll be asking Chief O'Meara to come up here in a little bit. Not yet, but at the point where we have some questions about what does this look like for the officers. But I want to hold that to a specific time in the conversation today. Councillor Duquesne.
I'll wait for Chief.
Okay. Let's keep going with the definitions.
The designated space are designated by management as a resting place or for voluntarily homeless. So that is our dawn to dusk. This is simple. If we were to establish other areas, you would have a designated area. Those areas would be considered designated spaces.
And shelter, we defined also with the mindset that a lot of the funding for people experiencing homelessness is regional and sometimes specific to like family or children. And so if there are facilities within our region, we wanted to include that in the definition. And the shelter and designated space come into play specifically also to make sure that in section B that we're not, if there are spaces available, we're guiding people to those spaces, and basically camping suspended if those spaces are not available.
The ordinance would be suspended, so we wouldn't enforce if there's no places for them
exactly.
to
go. So we'll just pause there.
Any questions?
No.
Go ahead.
And we've gone over involuntarily homeless. Again, this is directly out of the federal court's definitions, and if it may be difficult. Well, I won't go any further because I've already explained that, unless you need me to explain more. And then finally, occupying occupancy.
Yeah, occupancy is specifically for the section on occupancy. It used to be a sleeping in benches section, and the idea behind that was, even though there are scenarios where even if something's not exactly a campsite, there are scenarios where someone can occupy a space for kind of like such a long time and to the exclusion of others. And so we wanted to keep the spirit of the sleeping on benches ordinance and kind of change it so that it kept with the mindset that public spaces are spaces for everyone.
Councillor Kaplan?
Thank you. Just a question about the 2 hours. What's the basis for the 2 hour standard? Is that somehow some norm that we've observed?
Well, there was. I don't think, as I recall, in the let's see here.
Page 5.
Yeah, is it page 5? Okay. Sleeping on benches, where in that case, they just said, we just removed that. And there wasn't any time limit. You could just sleep on a bench all you wanted. The 2 hours is nothing special.
No, I think the opposite is the case. Because there's no time limit, you could not sleep on the bench even for 5 minutes.
Oh, yes, okay. So the 2 hours was a number in which what would normally, I guess, there was no specific time other than what would be a reasonable time for someone to occupy a space, I suppose. So they could be there for 8 hours, or they could be there for 4 hours, or they could be there for 2 hours. No special decision other than what seemed to be, again, a reasonable amount of time for someone to occupy one particular space, particularly a park bench, for instance.
And in this, just to follow up.
Yes.
And in this case, this is applied to anybody. This is whether somebody's voluntarily housed, unhoused, somebody's housed, involuntarily unhoused, voluntarily unhoused. This is
right.
just
Involuntarily
it's a blanket.
Or what?
Nobody can occupy the space for more than 2 hours. Any public space, in our city, if they're occupying more than 50 square feet, so a 5 by 10 dimension, roughly.
Yes.
Councillor Hyatt?
Thank you, Mayor. Doug, question about the 2 hours. So I think it's completely reasonable that folks may be at Garfield Park and put their blanket down on the lawn and be at the splash pad and playing on the playground and eating lunch, and that would exceed 2 hours. How do situations where residents are recreating in the parks on a hot summer day apply with a definition like this in a camping ordinance? Understanding that there may be a differentiator here that I'm not picking up on.
There isn't. I mean, the 2 hours is a number or a time period in which reasonable minds can disagree, and so if the council feels that 2 hours is just not something, if 4 hours is too much, or you don't even need to pass that part of the ordinance. So it's again was a time period that typically I don't know how many games last for more than 2 hours, I suppose, so those types of things. So
and just to point out, the prohibited occupancy has a violation of only a violation as it is now.
Yeah, it doesn't fall under the camping suggested
penalty
that comes later, which we will talk about.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So with that, those are the definitions. The other changes to the camping ordinances are just as follows, and that is that we use our camping ordinance that we used before, and we put in obviously those exceptions in which federal court and our state's legislatures have kind of laid out. And then as you walk, as you kind of apply what the ordinance is designed to do, you come up with the different exceptions as we work through this. So the no camping is not permitted in the typical places, again, that we haven't changed, other than we added the enhanced law enforcement areas.
Can I ask?
Then,
Councilor Kaplan?
And then, excuse me.
Just to make sure that I understand this correctly. So that's the existing ordinance, the current which is not modified. So the existing ordinance already prohibits camping upon any sidewalk, street, alley, lane, public right-of-way, business front, park, or playground, or any other publicly owned property, or under any bridge or viaduct. That's the current. That's the current situation.
And that's what we're using today, and we're enforcing it with the understanding, even though we don't have it written in, we're enforcing it with these different definitions, and we're making sure that people have alternatives, because we understand what the rules are. The problem is that our rules just don't comply with federal law at the moment. So what we're doing is we're actually applying the federal restrictions on cities by just by the practices that we're doing, but we can't guarantee those practices in years to come, because if you don't have the rules down, those practices could change. So this is why we're putting these rules in.
Yeah, in other words, we have policy right now that allows us to enforce the pretty limited camping ordinance as it is, but that's why we're coming as well for an update.
Yeah, we have to come to the update, and it's for protections of people who are involuntarily homeless.
So specific, I guess it's it's the B. It's the protections that you're building in,
right?
That comply with law, circuit, or at least jurisprudence, is that camping may be temporarily suspended if there's an exception, a camping emergency, or more frequently, there's a designated space, or there's no available designated space or shelter. So that's what currently what our police are doing.
That's correct.
Is they're applying that standard.
Yes.
If there's because there is a space, so therefore they are able to prohibit camping in any camp, any sidewalk, street, alley, lane, public right-of-way, business front, park, playground, or any other publicly owned property or under any bridge or viaduct. We already are able to do it and are doing it. Is that correct?
Yes, unless, but we're not enforcing it unless there's a designated space.
Well, that's right. That's right. As long as there's a designated space, which we currently have.
Which is what we have right now.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, Councilor Hanson?
Thank you, Mayor. So then,
yeah, good.
Just a tidbit. It is what we're hearing from the legislature is also that cities update their ordinances. So I do think it is important that the city update its ordinances, camping ordinance, to follow our policy.
So, thank you.
Which was a temporary fix.
So my question is in that instance where our current ordinance and our particular situation for that day does not allow for camping on the lawn or in a shelter, it's the time, place, and manner part, right? Where law enforcement is like, okay, there isn't a shelter space, there isn't place on the lawn, then you need to comply with something within these rules that's outside of sidewalks, bike paths, walkways, parks, playgrounds, and or 250 feet of designated space or shelter. So in that case, you are allowed to camp at this particular location because time, place, and manner allows for it, right? That's the exception.
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's what I think I.
That's our current ordinance. That's what happens when law enforcement is.
Right.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So maybe let's
That's
walk
correct.
through these next two sections.
Yeah,
These
so,
are both additional elements. This whole section A, pretty much A through C is. So I think those two elements B and C are tied closely together. So let's have you walk us through those two pieces, and then we'll ask questions once we get through the full list.
Okay, so the prohibition, as Councilor Kaplan said, there's an exception. If there's an emergency, we may need to have people camping. I mean, that's just something that could happen if there's a gigantic earthquake, God forbid, or those types of things. If the offender is involuntarily homeless and a designated space or shelter is unavailable, those would be the situations where the prohibition would be temporarily suspended. But regardless of whether or not there's an emergency, or regardless of whether or not there's other spaces available, if you're not allowed to camp where you're using gas, fire, or the campsite exceeds 100 feet, or when located attached to or within, and then we get into the different exceptions. So I think it's fairly clear. I mean, I understand why people would want to have camp gas stoves and those types of things, but in our environment, we can't make a winter rule and we can't make a summer rule. I mean, there's this fire and wildfire, and fire is just one of those things that is prohibited, and it was prohibited from the very beginning. The sidewalks, bike paths, and walkways, it's just dangerous for people to be camping on a sidewalk. And again, these exceptions are based on public safety. They're based on the fact that there is enforcement that needs to happen for some of these. In other words, there are certain areas that are sensitive to different kinds of activities, and it's for protection, essentially for to prevent expansion of more and more sites. So there's a number of different reasons behind each of these exceptions, and the numbers that are used, 250 feet. If it was 0 feet from a preschool or a designated space or shelter, then what's the point of the ordinance? If it's 500 feet, you're asking it becomes harder to justify a challenge to that, because at some point the space gets so large that you're creating that's prohibited, that the entire city becomes it just won't allow any kind of camping for those who may not have any choice but to camp. So you're defeating the purpose. So somewhere between 0 and 500 is an area where the ordinance has effect. Otherwise, it's ineffective going further, going from 500 to anything further than that. Does that make sense? I'm sorry. Okay.
I think, yeah.
I think it makes total sense. Thank you for that explanation, and also thanks for the context of trying to strike the right balance between 250 feet or 500 feet and what the actual impact is. My question is, so I'm understanding that this section C, which lists all of these other places, sidewalks, Lithia Park, and parks with playgrounds, 250 feet of a preschool, all of those things only apply. That prohibition only really is different than the general prohibition if there's no designated space.
That's correct.
Yes.
And that means then, because of am I correct, that, because a month ago, two sessions ago, we had a brief discussion about this, and I had asked for a map, and the city GIS team developed a map, which was very helpful. Thanks for that.
Good.
So looking at that, it's a little hard to read. The shading is a little bit hard to read sometimes, but when I look at that, what that tells me is that when there is no designated space, If the city doesn't have a designated space and people really can't camp and put up a tent in these other places.
Or a shelter.
Or a shelter. Thank you. The places that are available to them are the places that are not listed. So Halled Strawberry Park, other places up on the hillside, the golf course, Triangle Park, interestingly, the median strip of Siskiyou Boulevard, the circle in front of the library. Am I understanding that correctly? Yes. That all of those places are places that would be permitted camping because they would not be permitted to camp in these other places, but only if there's no designated space or shelter, as you said.
Yes, that's correct. I should add that the 100 yards from the river or stream, that's under statute already. That is that you're not allowed to litter within 100 yards. So we've used that number. The established campgrounds typically and are oftentimes, a lot of human activity. There's a lot of debris. So we feel safe that 100 yards, even though it's more than 500 feet, is if it's a state a number or distance, then that should be fine for us. And obviously, it's protection of the natural resource.
And with the sidewalk, bike path, another consideration for that one specifically, and is to consider people with mobility issues or people who have physical disabilities, that they are able to move in our community freely. This is a big balancing act.
So I have a question about the playgrounds identification here. Some folks have written in about the fact that parks are essentially playgrounds. Even if there isn't a playground structure, this is where our community's children often come to play. And even in Councillor Kaplan's example of Triangle Park, there is recreational equipment there. It's not much, but there's a small structure there. And so is there a reason why we wouldn't say all city parks?
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the rationales for the playground was specifically around young children, and for the parents out there, there's that specific age group where everything kind of goes in their mouth. Sometimes with campsites, it's unfortunate, but there is drug use, and I had a friend, as an example, who had 2 children at a playground. The older child was on the slide. Younger child had picked up a meth pipe. And so I think the idea behind the playground specifically was a public safety thought process, kind of geared for the policy, geared for the youngest members of our community.
But
is there any? I guess my question is there a legal prohibition if this council were to decide to include all parks? Does that run us into that same problem where we have the 500 feet? At some point, it becomes where you've prohibited it. Does that happen if we were to look at all of the parks?
That would be the concern.
Okay. So I guess,
Councillor Hansen.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Interestingly enough, parks now have hours. So the park closes, and after closing, you're no longer allowed to loiter in a park. So by default, you cannot camp in a park because of the hours.
So how does that relate to that other regulation?
You can. Good point, because you can trespass persons off of. You could post those areas that you don't want any camping. So you could technically go through and.
I think the curfew would act as a presumption that parks have a curfew, but at this point, if we are If there are not any shelter space or designated space available where camping must be allowed, and at that part, it's a constitutional issue that will trump the curfew. And that camping will then be subject to the time, place, and manner policies of management.
Yeah.
Unless you have anything to add.
No, I would agree.
Councillor Hyatt?
My question is if we have a contradiction within A and C. Under A, it says, except as otherwise provided herein, and then it goes on to enumerate a variety of places, including public right-of-way, business front, park, standalone park, then playground. Then further on down, as we get into this, it says parks with playgrounds. So I think we have parks called out in section A, further definition in section C, but I think it introduces confusion because non-legal mind, I read this as including parks.
What it says is that in A, you're not allowed to camp unless there's an exception. But in C, it says, regardless of the exception, you're not allowed to park. You're not allowed to camp in Lithia Park.
Okay.
You're not allowed to camp in a camp with a playground. Now, if you are
so said another
and if
way,
you have no designated space, if you have no designated space or shelter, and you can find a park that doesn't have a playground and is not Lithia, then under this ordinance, you'd be able to at least find a place to survive there. But I don't think that there is a
conflict.
A conflict.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Thank you.
Councillor Dale?
All right, let me see if I can restate this back to you, and you let me know if I'm on track, okay? Because I'm going to try and simplify this here.
Okay.
So as I'm reading this, okay, section 10.46.020, A, B, C, D, E, and I'll stipulate all of the definitions within the parks with playgrounds, so forth. Everything in that section, the answer is no, regardless of whether there is a shelter available or not, okay? So far, so good?
So far, so good.
Okay. So then, barring that, it is not assumed, and the intention is not that it is a hard yes everywhere else, such as medians or Triangle Park, because there is a gray area or everything down in, later down in section, and I know we'll get there in 10.46.04, which is the removal of campsites, are specific to things like hazardous materials, public health emergency, immediate danger to human life. So that's where a decision is made by someone that would be enforcing this rule. And if the answer then, that becomes a different decision tree, correct? If the answer is yes, that there is a designated shelter, then we can then just move forward to helping going down that path. If the answer is no, then we have to determine what is in the public interest due to safety or hazardous materials, and what would be in conflict with state and court rulings. Is that a fair decision tree? Am I reading this ordinance correctly that way?
I guess I'm lost at when you went to 10.46040, which is a removal of campsites.
As an example.
Okay.
A person is camping on the median.
He's on the median. Sure. Right. Got it.
It's not specifically prohibited in 020, right?
Correct.
Okay. If an officer or other individual with the authority to enforce this assumes that is a danger and respective to other parts in this ordinance, then a decision needs to be made.
That's correct.
If there is shelter available, it's a pretty easy decision, correct?
That's correct.
If there is not shelter available, then we have to kind of go to the next step. So it's not just a blanket permission, sleep anywhere you want, as long as it's not in the things that are listed in A.
That's correct.
Okay.
So
thank you.
So if he was in the median strip, she or he was in the median strip, and they were, potentially, sleeping, rolling into the highway, then clearly, no, you're not sleeping here. I realize it's not anywhere on this list, but law enforcement can make that kind of rational decision, saying, I'm not going to allow someone to sleep on the edge of a cliff.
Exactly. Thank you.
Just another quick question about the playgrounds. Would it be possible to change that language to more specifically identify child or youth recreational equipment? Would you see any potential problem with that? We'll talk about all the details later, but we don't have a definition of playground, and I think we would all think it's something different.
Here you go. What's the definition? Do you want someone else to make that definition, or do you want us to make the definition? Right. I think you want to make that definition.
Yeah, and Mayor, you've picked up that there are parts in this ordinance that we are very intentional and very specific because they come out of case law, and the Parks with Playground is not one of those examples.
Great. I have one other question about this list, and that is where it says 150 feet of other campsites. I would imagine that if we're in a circumstance where there's nowhere else for people to go, that the people who are unhoused and forced to sleep outside might have relationships where they would feel safer sleeping closer together. So is this kind of a standard element, or is this something that we might shift?
I think the idea behind, unless...
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll chime in if I have
yeah,
an idea.
I think the idea, thank you, is that I don't think that the city has an interest in creating large campsite
encampments
organizations, but at the same time, families, there's clearly, attention there. I'm not sure that. Let me look here. Camping sites. Campsite means any place where bedding.
Well, and I'll chime in while Doug's looking up his question. One of the kind of words of caution that we've heard or that we've gotten as advice from other from the LOC and other cities that have gone into this issue quite deeply is that for the cities who and this often happens with larger cities, but cities who have, if there are, for spaces where there has been more sprawling campsites, that is also a city problem, in that there are dangers within kind of a sprawling campsite that where it's not even, there are safety issues even for the people in those campsites. And so it was my understanding that one of the reasons to have feet in to differentiate campsites was also to kind of go at that idea. The reason there's a specific number is because when you write an ordinance, you want law enforcement to have clear instruction, which is helpful for them. It's helpful for us standing by our ordinance, and so that's kind of some of the rationale for that we keep campsites safe as well.
Okay, Councilor Kaplan, thank you.
Yes, thanks for that explanation, and just to go back and make sure that we're all laser focused on this. These are the cases where there's not a designated space, if there is, or shelter. If there is a designated space or shelter, then this doesn't give any additional enforcement power. And just as I take your point, Carmel, about it being important to be clear for law enforcement, having kind of clear numbers and definitions so they can enforce. Is it not also true that it'd be helpful to be clear for people who may find themselves in the situation that they don't have a place to sleep, and they may be looking for a place to sleep, and then having a designated space to sleep is a whole lot easier than trying to go around and figure out whether it's got to play youth and child athletic equipment or any of these other things as well. So right. we're much better off having a designated space or shelter, and then all of this is moot.
That's correct.
Yes.
That's the reason why we're waiting towards the end to get this final piece done. Sorry, but it's important for everybody to understand what the rules are. And I'm sure the chief will tell you that the best enforcement is for people to understand what they're being enforced to do. And if the rules don't make any sense, and an officer can't explain what the rule is, then it's chaos. And so what you want is something that's logical and at the same time able to be repeated to someone when they're saying, this is what's wrong and this is the rule.
Okay. All right, let's carry on.
So those are the exceptions that are provided for you. The next one is the city manager has authority to establish additional administrative rules, and that's where we are right now. That is that when people are living outside, there are a myriad and uncountable different kinds of circumstances that could exist, as opposed to, for instance, someone living in a shelter. So if someone's living outside, you kind of have to sometimes actually make up the rules as you go along. I mean, what happens if you get too many? We ran out of designated space, or other types of things, but we can make a designated space. So what we're doing here is we're allowing the city manager to be able to make time, place, and manner type rules for and not have to come back to you to make those rules. So, for instance, in the case of this, our dawn to dusk or dusk to dawn site, we had to make rules for the campers there. I mean, can you smoke cigarettes? Can you, there's a number of things, how many bathrooms we need to have there, and those type of things. And so those are kinds of things in which we don't want to come back to a city council to ask for a resolution or a ordinance when the city manager can make some of these rules that are related to time, place, and manner as to the actual designated sites, for instance, or for other instances that may come up in an emergency or other types of things.
Yeah, and there are a lot of other cities who have put the time, place, and manner into their ordinance. I think one of the reasons to have it with the city manager is that the standard is reasonableness, and when we're talking about human condition and life, there are scenarios that come up that you wouldn't even think of, but that would be reasonable, that you would really want to change your policy for, or maybe tweak it. And so I think that's some of the rationale for having it with the city manager.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was going on the next subject
Councilor
matter.
Kaplan has a follow-up question.
I think it's important. This point that you're making, Carmel, about time, place, and manner. I mean, it's become kind of within our lexicon, right? Everyone's talking about time, place, and manner.
Because it's part of the legislation. So that it comes out of House Bill 3115.
So could you unpack it just a little bit for us so that we're absolutely clear what that time, what's meant by time, what's meant by place, what's meant by manner? You used the example, Doug, of the dusk to dawn lawn and the rules of the dusk to dawn lawn. Does this also apply to other kinds of places, of prohibitions and or allowances?
Well. So for instance, there are, in the rules that you have right now are embedded. So the time, 8 hours. Is it 8 hours? Is it 4 hours? I mean, you can make those kinds of decisions. Or is 2 hours not long enough? So when a court, and again, the time, place, and manner comes from federal interpretation of our Constitution. Okay, and it applies to many things, and so in this case, it applies to your civil rights. So any regulation of your civil rights has to fit within time, place, and manner. So the time, again, 2 hours. The place, where would you put someone? Designated areas, and where can someone be or not be? Where can someone speak? In the First Amendment area, that's where the time, place, and speak. Just like the rules about in this room, you have a right to control speech in this room. That is, you can't yell, you can't do all these different things. Those are things that are reasonable, and courts have made decisions on. The manner is this manner that we're doing right now. That is, what's the manner in which we are enforcing this regulation. So we get to looking at concerns with playgrounds, for instance, or whether it's 150 feet from other campsites, and so the manner in which we do that, and the punishment that goes along with it. And so those are all aspects of time, place, and manner. And so when you are looking at the question about whether or not law enforcement has, to stop something that would otherwise appear hazardous, like sleeping in the middle of the median, we might need to make a rule about that, or manager just say, we're just going to enforce, so that people are doing things that are not, make sure that people aren't doing things that are hazardous if they're camping somewhere. So there may be some types of tweaks that you would need to do, and typically the attorneys are involved in it. It's not a time, place, or manner that a law enforcement officer makes that decision. It's up high enough on the ladder in which the decision is then sifted through until finally it now becomes part of an enforcement action. So you're not going to be able to enforce that from a law enforcement police officer level unless you've been given permission, and that permission effectively should be one in which a couple eyes have been on that before it ever gets to a point of enforcement.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to be mindful of the time. We're at 8 o'clock, and we are about maybe halfway or a little bit less. And I think one of the biggest sticking points is still coming.
It is?
So, oh yeah. And so let's keep going down through section E, and then where it talks about the vehicles. That's our next section.
Yeah.
Let's talk through that.
Do you want to go through that one?
This one, kind of unlike D, this one really is the time, place, and manner restrictions when it comes to vehicle camping. And the rationale for this is that when it comes to vehicles, it's a lot more predictable ahead of time what would be reasonable restrictions on vehicle camping. So in this case, and again, in the kind of idea of trying to put as much stuff forward, these really are time, place, and manner restrictions for vehicle camping.
Right. Councilor Duquesne? Oh, no.
Do you have any questions on that? Okay.
Nope. Yeah, keep going.
We get to the prohibited occupancy. Again, that's we can talk about the time issue on that one if you desire more. But at this point, we would then move to the removal of campsites.
I have one question about that, and that
Sure.
is under the definition of occupancy, if I remember that correctly, it has a 50 square foot section related to that.
10 by 5.
Yes, 10 by 5. So I'm wondering how that works with a park bench. So I'm assuming that what we mean is that someone can sit on a park bench, someone could potentially lay on a park bench, but somebody couldn't lay out their blanket on a park bench. So how do we understand that occupancy in relation to street furniture?
Means that if they are controlling an area that's more than 5 by 10, it doesn't necessarily, well, I mean, you're right. I mean, it would include shall occupy public, in this case, we're talking about specifically public area or street furniture, which would include a bench. And during the time is provided in the definitions of occupancy. So we're just talking about the time period in occupancy, I believe. 2 hours. But we're not talking about the area.
So if I understand this correctly, what you're saying is that when it says occupy a public area, that's when the 50 square feet would come in, or street furniture then doesn't involve the 50 square feet. Okay, thank you. Okay,
Is that right? That's not what I understand from H. Could we go back to the definition of H?
Okay,
I think you're right, Mayor, that occupancy means to maintain physical control over a publicly owned area of 50 square feet or greater. And so I think you're pointing out that a park bench is not generally 50 square feet or greater. So therefore, somebody could take occupancy of a park bench for all day and not be in violation of this ordinance. Is that correct?
Well, you might have caught a conflict.
It might be it.
Yeah. I mean, it could be fixed.
Possibly a change in definition?
Well, no, I'd prefer not to change definitions if I can, but you could just make that distinction in this occupancy ordinance, and I'm already looking at it. I don't see that distinction right at the moment, but it seems like a fairly easily fixed distinction I could make.
Okay. Councillor Bloom.
Thank you, Mayor. Is it possible that you could draw up that language in the time that we're going over this so that a proper amendment could be made to change that? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep going.
Oh, you want to start on the removal of campsites, and I'll start working on language.
Yeah. For the removal of campsites, the city will remove established campsites and property having apparent value or utility according to the ORS 195-505. And so some of what we crossed out was really, it was old, outdated language. 195-505 has been updated numerous times, and statutes go through numerous updates, and so instead of always having to update an ordinance, we're just going to refer to the ORS. And the rest of the removal of campsite follows the spirit of that statute, ORS 195-505, in that it goes through the established campsite part, as we talked at length in the beginning, and then it talks about how police can remove, even if a campsite's established, they can remove immediately if there's illegal activity or if there's hazardous, and it goes through removing immediately hazardous material. And so this section follows that statute.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When I see the first one, campsites that are not established campsites, it comes back to the earlier conversation we had about established campsites have 3 days. So if our law enforcement comes upon someone who has a campsite that's not established, are they given the opportunity to remove their campsite before it is removed by law enforcement?
Practically, yes. I imagine that would be a practice that the police department would do, but then also if there is no compliance, then that yes, that would result in your first violation.
But it's in our best interest not to remove property unless we have to.
Yes,
in terms of an enforcement issue.
Very much so. The city very much does not want to take people's property. That is a big undertaking. It's something that we would do. Yes, I can't. It's hard to describe how much we wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And in fact that also goes. Anyway. Yeah.
So anything else to present under that section? Under we see the hazardous material piece.
No, just that section D goes through a pretty exhaustive appeal process, and so this section is for taking. So if there is property that is not hazardous, we will hold on to it if someone refuses to take it themselves. If it's hazardous, then we get rid of that, and we kind of went through a longer definition for what that can mean. But what we don't want is, we want to make sure that if people aren't taking their property in the removal of a campsite, that they have that will hold on to it for a time period. You can appeal it, and it can go through that process.
Councilor Duquesne.
Thank you, Mayor. Quick question, Carmel. When property is taken, where does the individual go to get their property?
Yeah, we'll have to figure out a public works section, and we'll have to develop notices and a policy to, we'll have to develop notices when we're enforcing that part of it.
And so the hearings officer, we don't know who that is, but it's not necessarily a municipal court process.
Sorry, a hearings officer is Sabrina through our, which is defined as the manager.
Yeah, city manager.
Okay.
Yeah. Right now, in our existing ordinances, the hearings officer is the city manager.
And sorry, I think I misspoke earlier. Anyway.
Right.
Councilor Kaplan.
Yeah, thanks. So this section D seems to distinguish between two types of property that has no apparent value or utility, and property that has an apparent property value and utility. Am I understanding correctly to understand that property that has no apparent value or utility will be held for 14 days and then can be discarded if there's an appeals process there. But if it's got apparent value or utility, it's got to be held for 30 days. Is that the basic reading of that section?
I would say no. How it works is that if it has no apparent value, like it's a hazardous waste or it is trash, it's something in which a reasonable person couldn't figure out what to do with it because it's just garbage, it's broken or whatever, then that has no apparent, again, the apparent value is defined as personal property means the property that is essential in practicality and significance to the owner's daily life and well-being, and includes but is not limited to clothing, bedding, personal hygiene items, identification documents, and any tools or resources necessary for survival and meeting basic needs, maintaining dignity, and facilitating self-care. This definition does not include such property as non-functional or broken items, excessive or redundant items, hazardous or dangerous materials, or items with limited or no personal value. So if you have excuse me, go ahead.
Yeah, so I understood that from the definition, but if I'm reading D, it says, except for the items set forth in the above in subpart C, that may immediately be discarded, like the ones that you're talking about.
Wait, hold on.
Like hazardous material. Personal property, a city employee.
Bob, if you might just pause for a second so we can follow. Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. A city employee or agent determines has no apparent value will be held for, or utility will be held by the city for 14 days after its removal. So that's why I was understanding there's a distinction of two types of material other than the hazardous stuff that you're talking about discarding immediately. There's material that has no apparent value that'll be held for 14 days, and anything that has apparent value or utility will be held for 30 days. Is that am I misreading it, or is there just a typo? But
Yeah, that probably
originally I thought there was a typo, but the fact that there's a differential treatment down below made me think that there was an intentional distinction.
Yeah, it probably should just be property.
Property.
Because that property would include both items that were obviously valuable as well as items that have no apparent value but are not hazardous.
That's right, and apologies for that. This part has gone through many iterations of how to make sure that we are giving a kind of a due process for the property, so that probably should just be property. And then it's hazardous property that we'll have to discard.
And then the idea would be this be in accordance with state law. It would need to be held for 30 days, not 40. It cannot be discarded after just 14 days.
Yeah, and that's a protection for legal, so that because in the statute in 195-505, it's you hold property with apparent value for 30 days,
exactly.
And so that's why we put in the floor of the 30 days. But yeah, it should probably be property.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We can move on now.
Okay, and I think we get to the very end, which is with respect to
yeah, I do have a
two
quick
penalties.
I just have to interrupt. Councillor Bloom has a question on that last section.
Sorry, Doug. So in order to change that, we would need to make an amendment to change that subsection, correct? The wording in that?
Yeah, we would have to read in that section.
Okay. Is it possible for us to drop an amendment for that tonight, or is that something that we can drop for a second reading of this ordinance?
No, we could do that, and then we'll just read that section.
Great, thank you.
So yes, so if there's any changes, what we'll do is we'll make the change, and then we'll read it out loud for you at this session, and then you would say go forth, and then we'll bring it back on second with those corrections in the document.
Great.
Second reading, excuse me.
Okay.
Okay, so the final item is violations. Of course, the penalties for this as has been followed. We've had it in the past. That is just a class 4 type fine. I can't remember exactly how much that is, but it's a fine. All right. However, if after the issuance of 2 camping violations, then we're talking about persistent type of behavior. And again, I think as Mr. Kaplan has pointed out on several different occasions, we're talking about people who are not involuntarily homeless, who have other choices, but have continued and refused to abide by the ordinance. And there are those that do that. Not for lack of having other places to do, but they are criminal type behavior. That is bad behavior. And so with that, given that persistence, it's essentially a willful choice to not follow the rules or accept any kind of alternatives, then at that point it becomes a criminal type of it becomes a criminal misdemeanor.
And I think the premise that if we get to the penalty section is that the penalty is applied for camping in public spaces. Like if we've gone through the ordinance enough where we're at the penalty phase, that person is camping in public spaces, because if someone is experiencing homelessness, that person we will accommodate, we will make sure has a space, try and get them shelter. So that's the important distinction, and Doug's kind of repeated numerous times, is that it's for the behavior associated with the camping, and not someone's status or difficulty in experiencing in homelessness.
Okay. All right, then that's it.
Questions? Councillor Duquesne.
Thank you. So I understand, and because of the questions that Councilor Kaplan has asked, it is clear. However, when I look down the ordinance here, and it says, if you can explain to us if an offender has been cited under this ordinance can show meaningful engagement with referred service provider or similar before a court hearing regarding the violation of this ordinance, the judge may excuse with discretion. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, I think it's a common practice in prosecution to always work with people. I know the other context that often applies is if, for example, if the real barrier for kind of like stopping the behavior is mental health or addiction. If someone is meaningfully engages in kind of in self-help that is really the underlying issue and can show that, then yeah, that warrants dismissal, that warrants reduction in fine. That's something that happens practically, and we put it in to reflect the spirit of what happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. I have a follow-up to that. Councilor Duquesne, did you have a follow-up?
No, I just wanted to comment because we don't want to hinder anyone's growth in helping themselves to do better. So I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah, I think the city, we would go out of our way to, that would be a huge plus. We would hope to see that all the time.
Mm-hmm. So when I read that section where it says the judge may exercise discretion to reduce the criminal charge, does that include reducing the criminal charge to a violation? It does. Yes. I just wanted to confirm that. Mm-hmm. Councilor Bloom.
Thank you, Mayor. And in the earlier part, the court shall consider in mitigation of any punishment imposed upon a person convicted of prohibitive camping, whether or not the person immediately removed the campsite upon being cited. Would it be fair to say that this is, in a way, a protection for folks that have concerns that the police are just going to come immediately cite them and there's nothing they can do about it? That with witnesses, they could demonstrate to a court that, no, I was told I had to pack up and I've packed up.
Yep.
Thank you.
It's like giving permission for a fix-it ticket.
Mm-hmm. Councilors, do you have any questions of Chief O'Meara before we call folks forward to testify? Okay. We are now at the, Councilor Bloom. Chief, if you could come up.
Good evening.
Hi, may I? Okay, thank you. Would you say that it's common practice for APD in previous interactions, previous attempts to remove campsites, that you do make an effort to contact a service provider or have somebody available to guide somebody towards services?
We do try to connect unhoused people with services. I'm not going to say that it's something that absolutely happens 100% of the time, but it definitely is the practice, and it's our desire to help people, not simply be punitive.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Dale.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. Normally I don't like to put anybody on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot here because that's when, in your line of work, you're in the business of being put on the spot and making snap decisions, and I appreciate that. So my question to you is relative to this ordinance. While probably not perfect, do you find any, from your vantage point, do you see any glaring inconsistencies that we have missed or anything otherwise that we need to address given the importance of this?
I can't think of any, Counselor. I appreciate that this is a very complex and contentious issue with a lot of emotion behind it. I think that it is, if it's put in place down the road, maybe we'll recognize that we missed something, but I can't think of anything right now. I think it's pretty comprehensive.
Thank you.
And Chief, Councilor Hyatt.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. Chief, question, and I know there was a brief discussion on it at the very beginning of going through the ordinance. With regard to the definitions of voluntary and involuntary, is that something that would be utilized by APD in the process of enforcement? How does that look in the field?
I defer to the legal team about the necessity to have that in there. That's why, they're lawyers and I'm not a lawyer. I do not envision Ashland police officers questioning people about their, as Doug said, about their backstory. I don't believe that that's appropriate. I think that Ashland police officers, if this is put into place, are going to be responsive to the facts as presented, that there seems to be a prohibited camping violation. Are you aware that there is a designated lawn spot that is available and waiting for you right now, and base their enforcement decision off of that? I do not think that we will want to try to get into analyzing somebody's life story. I don't think that that's our position. I don't think it's our responsibility. I think it's our responsibility to simply be responsive to the objective, apparent violation of the law, offer a course of action to that person if it's available, and then make a decision.
Thank you.
Chief, I have one final question here, and that is the ordinance indicates that an offender's first and second violation is punishable by an AMC Class 4 fine. Does that mean that a person who is found in violation of this receives a citation? Because the fact that it is punishable by a Class 4 fine, does that mean that everyone who is found camping in the wrong place is going to receive a fine?
No, absolutely not. Fewer than 50%. Sorry?
No, we will not have that.
Fewer than 50% of enforcement contacts that Ashland police officers engage in, fewer than 50% result in enforcement. It is typical that lots and lots and lots of warnings are given out before the tickets start coming. It's not our desire to be punitive. It's not our desire to take people's property from them. It confuses our world when we have to do that stuff. We'd rather that people just comply with the societal framework that the communities put up.
Okay, thank you. So, Councilor Bloom, and then we do need to move on.
Yeah, just one quick follow-up. If the council did ask and request to see evidence of that less than 50% are citations, you would be able to produce that, of course?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Hanson.
Thanks, Mayor. Chief, a quick question. This calendar year, what kind of extra enforcement have you extended to like, let's just narrow it down to South Ashland to address some of these issues?
We've noticed an increase in apparent negative behavior in the Ashland Street business corridor, roughly around exit 14. We have dedicated extra resources and made available overtime slots for uniformed officers to dedicate their time. We have created a specific patrol area that includes that area for tracking purposes, and we are planning on establishing an office presence across the parking lot from Rite Aid as soon as we can work out the logistics.
Great, thank you. And could you explain what kind of goals or aspirations you have?
Actually, I need to interrupt here. We need to stay focused on this particular ordinance. We can pick those up later if we can get to them in the last agenda item.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we now move to public testimony on this issue. We have 14 people who are signed up. And one of the things that we do here, one of our procedures is, while it is not allowed to speak support for something, what we do encourage folks to do is that if somebody ahead of you says something you agree with, to simply give us a quiet signal, a silent signal. That helps the council understand the extent to which what is being said is shared by the people in the audience. It also allows anyone who comes behind to shorten their conversation to us, because what has been expressed has already been expressed by those in the room who care about that particular issue. Doing that will help us move through this section in a way that gets us the information that we need in terms of what you care about, but will also allow us to stay on track with our schedule. The calendar, our agenda this evening still has 5 items after this one, and we have a hard stop at 9:30. So we're hoping to get through this in a respectful way and hear what everyone has to say, but then also stay on track with our evening's meeting. So what I will do is I will call people forward 2 at a time. Please, both people come up at the same time, go in order of who I have called, and then I will also let the next 2 people know in line that they are up next. As soon as the first 2 people leave, the next 2 people please come up, and I will then let the next 2 behind them know that they are next up. Everyone will have 2 minutes. Alyssa will give you again a signal when you have 20 seconds left, a single chime signal, and a double chime signal when you are at your 2 minutes. It is critically important that you stop at that 2-minute section so that this council can go on to the next people who have something to share. So with that, we will start calling folks forward. We first have Ainsley Herrick, and then J.D. Behrens. Then we have Grace Pettygrove and Rich Rohde. And I would just remind everyone that what we are talking about here right now is this ordinance. So the comments need to be focused only on this particular ordinance. And with that, let's go ahead and get started.
Thank you. My name is Reverend Ainsley Herrick. I'm a local pastor and employee of the Ashland Public Library. I do not speak on behalf of the library. I have only 2 words to describe this ordinance: cruel and dehumanizing. It's been proven that criminalizing homelessness does not solve the crisis. Numerous studies have demonstrated the only proven solution to homelessness is housing. Not campgrounds or shelters, but long-term stable housing that provides autonomy and the opportunity for people struggling with addiction or mental health to stabilize and receive treatment. But instead of implementing these proven practices, Ashland is choosing cruel laws that only make life harder for our most vulnerable community members, simply so housed people don't have to look at them. In the time I've lived and worked here, I've watched hostility towards the unhoused community increase significantly. This ordinance encourages further division between the housed and unhoused community. It says people who aren't lucky enough to have homes are third-class citizens, that only unhoused people who fit into your idea of good homeless person are deserving of help. It fails to consider the many complicated causes of homelessness and the reason why shelters don't work for many experiencing long-term homelessness. It perpetuates the dangerous stereotype of voluntary homelessness, a myth that is used to further discrimination and deny assistance. You can't pass a law like this and then claim to care about your unhoused neighbors. Just last month at the Ashland Library, a housed patron approached staff to make disparaging, derogatory remarks about an unhoused patron, and then proceeded straight to said unhoused patron to mace her in an unprovoked attack simply because she was existing there. And these kinds of incidents are the results of dehumanizing our neighbors, something that you spoke out again about, Mayor, earlier today. And so I urge you to take the time to listen to the unhoused community and advocates who can tell you that this will only exacerbate the crisis.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for having me. I live in Ashland. My name is J.D. Behrens. With regard to citations, it is a concern because this was done after the Resource Center was opened in Ashland. We still don't know what's going to happen after January 10th with the folks staying there. Lacey Maverick McCoy has already faced $1,000 in citations recently. She received most of those citations here in Ashland and also on the Night Lawn, the dusk to dawn site. And she received citations for very little incidents, and I don't know why exactly she got them, but they're over $1,000. She's forced to pay out of her government support, which is only $400 a month. She's not a criminal. She's trying to survive with her kids. She has meaningful engagement with the community. Keep in mind that $400 is not enough to pay for housing. It does seem like the courts and law enforcement are siphoning her government support. There's no transparency with this at all. I want to make it clear, rarely are people voluntarily homeless. We don't choose this by choice. It's very hard to find housing for $400 a month. I'm facing an unstable employment situation here in Ashland for over a year. It's not temporary. And I've already spoken to 3 people who have jobs in Ashland and are forced to live out of their vehicles or camp on someone's property. It's very troubling that this is very common in the Rogue Valley. And I'm concerned that this could happen to me also. Will I be forced to pay these citations if I have to camp somewhere, in my vehicle, on someone's property? If I get thrown out, what's going to happen to me? These are very negative influences affecting our community. NPR has also covered the issue. You're sending a message that this is a very hostile place to live. And regarding hate speech, we need to be careful about how we talk about our unhoused neighbors. Please abolish this punitive ordinance.
Thank you. Grace Pettygrove and Rich Rohde will be followed by Torin McKnight and Heron Boyce.
Hi, my name is Grace Pettygrove. I live here in Ashland. I just wanted to also express my opposition to passing this ordinance. I think, as others have echoed, that it's wrong to criminalize homelessness always, and especially when we're having such a significant housing crisis. It's really notable to me, and I'm sorry I didn't prepare a speech, but I just needed to come speak. It's just really noticeable to me that how much we are fixating on homelessness as a problem rather than housing as the issue. And I also was moved to come here when I heard that part of what was motivating this was echoing other camping bans that have happened in other cities. I, as a volunteer with various projects in Medford, have witnessed firsthand the really deadly consequences of the way that the new camping ban has been enforced there. We see a lot of the same folks come out every week that supposedly that ordinance was supposed to force into services or something like that. And then there's people that we don't see anymore because they've passed away from hypothermia. And this is like a life or death thing. And the other thing I wanted to say is just that just focusing on whether or not people would eventually get a fine or be able to fight that, it doesn't actually account for the violence of people experiencing harassment from law enforcement when they're living on the streets, and also people's inability to access adequate legal support if they decide that they want to fight something that they thought was unjust. People don't actually have those resources, and in the moment, violence is violence. Whether or not it results in them eventually getting a fine is something else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rich Rohde, 124 Ohio. I have just a very short written statement. Before that, I just want to say to the council how much I appreciate your openness to listen to all sides. That's really terrific, because this is one of the most profound issues in our state, in our country. And the unfortunate part is that it's being designed by two people with no other voices. We need another way, I'm going to mention it, about how we bring in other people, like we did with the housing production strategy, where we get unanimity, we get compromise, and we get good policy. Oregon's homeless problem is profound and one requiring attention. Unfortunately, like many places throughout the country, the response to this crisis has been to further criminalize homelessness, making it against the law to engage in basic life-saving, life-sustaining activities that are associated with being unhoused. Research reveals an entire legal infrastructure in Oregon that makes meeting basic survival needs illegal in public places. There are 224 laws that create clear barriers to performing sustaining activities and legalize the unfair and harmful treatment of the unhoused communities. Key findings show that there is a prevalence and proliferation of local and county municipal codes in Oregon that criminalize unhoused communities. These ordinances include criminal penalties for violation of acts. Some criminalization measures include carrying out sweeps, confiscating personal property, including tents, bedding, paper, clothing, and medications. Is the proposed Ashland camping ordinance criminalization? Yet this includes potential misdemeanors for camping, and it will allow confiscating personal property. A criminal record adds to the already difficult situation of finding employment, getting housing, or being eligible for certain services.
Thank you, Mr. Rohde.
Okay.
Your time is up.
Y'all can do better if you use the homeless master plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Torrin McKnight, Heron Boyce, Debbie Neiswander, and Janet Bell.
Hello, my name is Torrin McKnight, and I'm here to talk about the proposed update to the prohibited camping ordinance. Myself and many others have read through it, and we understand what it is attempting to do. And as someone involved in mutual aid in various communities, including the unhoused, I can't help but feel that this ordinance is fueled more by animosity towards unhoused people than any rational attempt to solve issues. Let's talk about the specifics. The current and updated ordinance outright bans quote-unquote camping in Ashland, with only vague exceptions for emergencies like, quote, human suffering or financial loss. But aren't those the very reasons people end up unhoused in the first place? Then there's the, quote, severe weather circumstance, undefined and open to interpretation. No mention of clear, reasonable parameters, such as minimum and maximum temperatures and specific weather phenomena. Without that, it's too open to interpretation, and that vagueness will be abused like it has been in Medford. Now, the ordinance states that, quote, camping is prohibited on any publicly owned property in Ashland. This means it is literally a citywide ban, considering everything that isn't private property falls under this category. And if that's not restrictive enough, the punishment for violating the current and updated ordinance is either a Class 4 fine, which is $250, or 8 hours of community service, aka forced labor. There's a word for that. This is beyond harsh, especially for people just trying to survive outside. It is excessive, possibly violating people's Eighth Amendment rights on the grounds of excessive fines and cruel or unusual punishment. And if the well-being and rights of unhoused folks aren't enough to get you to care, know that this will open the city up to possible lawsuits. We've seen the impact in Medford, destabilized lives, increased danger, and deaths. Passing this in Ashland means more lives lost, and that would be on you. Prohibition doesn't work. The real solution is housing, not bans, not arrests, not stigma or NIMBY mindsets. It's housing. I urge the Ashland City Council not to consider this update to the ordinance or the current one that already exists, or any other restriction on people trying to survive. Instead, focus on helping people with housing, mutual aid, and listening to the voices of unhoused people. This is how you truly become a city of peace. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Heron Boyce. Jesus Christ once spoke, do unto the least of these as you would do unto me. So why is it necessary to hold men, women, and children who are poor in finance but rich in spirit at a distance from parks and community spaces? To enforce this ban in entire regions of people from community spaces is unconstitutional and elitist thinking. Further, why is it that the deer are permitted to consume and exist wherever they choose, and yet traveling youth and impoverished families are seen as lawbreakers, to be criminalized, run out of town? This is intolerant for free-thinking people. It would be too much to perceive each free-thinking human being and houseless member of the community as an individual, a divine child of God, if not mandated by our Creator, then to be seen as valued equally on his or her own intrinsic being, regardless of holding of their productivity. Might does not make right, and in a dominant section of society with a willful set of actions is forcing otherwise good citizens to believe that they are unworthy of equal housing and general essential goods. This is a broadly criminal act. There's even a consent amongst the wealthy population which dictates public policy to demand the alterations of quality of the community to be governed as if by golden effigies of increased property value and affluent biases, profit-laden objectives rather than quality of life issues. As if there is a possible future in upping the cost of living to a point the average service worker can no longer afford lodging, but is left to their own devices. This cannot stand in a evolved society that is concerned with the quality and integrity of human life. There's no accountability, and this should be denounced. I got 10 copies here for you guys.
If you can give those to the recorder. Thank you. We have Debbie Neiswander, Janet Bell, and then following them will be Jesse Carson Hamilton and Dennis Slattery.
Yes. My name is Debbie
Weiswander, Ashland resident, and yes, I oppose this ordinance.
Ms. Weiswander, can you get in a little closer to that microphone so we can hear you better?
How am I doing now?
That's better, thank you.
Okay, doke. Can we start over on my time?
Yes, let's start our time again.
Thank you. Is what I'm going to talk about is this reasonable alternative, which you call designated space, which is the night lawn or the dawn to dusk area behind the police department. One thing we haven't defined is what is reasonable. This is not a reasonable alternative, okay? It's creating a lot of chaos and instability. There is a serious rat problem getting into tents and our food supply. There is a serious theft problem. We have people coming in and stealing from these folks on a regular basis. Then these folks are being cited for prohibited camping if they do not get off the lawn when at 7:30 or when the police come around 9 o'clock. It's creating a lot of instability and chaos. I don't recommend anyone coming to the night lawn. It is unsafe. It is not a reasonable alternative. It is actually cruel and unusual punishment. And now we're going to designate 250 feet from the shelter, which means these folks aren't even going to be able to move up into the strip. They're going to have to move every 2 hours with all their belongings. This does not make sense. The police have already informed us that we cannot set temps up on the strip out front, and pretty soon we're not going to be able to be there at all. You've shown no map of where we can be and where the campers, designated areas are for campers.
Thank you.
I oppose this ordinance.
Thank you.
Wow. So thank you. I mean, really, I don't know if anybody in this room would want to change positions with you to be in this conversation. It just, it's a real public service to be a city council person of Ashland right now, and staff supporting. This is, of course, an issue way bigger than the city of Ashland, way, way bigger in terms of the economics of this country, that, we're not the only place that has people being voluntarily or involuntarily homeless, and the stories behind them. And I come from South Ashland Neighborhood Business Coalition, and I sent yesterday, or a couple of days ago, really our particular approach at this point for many of these arguments that are coming up right now, around this ordinance, and how we're viewing it. And I could go over that with you here, but I just really invite you to go back to the email that I sent out on Monday night to and look at it and map it on to what has occurred tonight and will continue to occur. But I think really I just want to leave you with, again, it was mentioned, but thank you for being willing to listen this through, because it's going to take that. It is going to take, we're not going to resolve the homeless situation in Ashland overnight, but we also have public safety of all kinds that whether it's our children and how close to schools and this and that all have to be brought into the mix. So I just, again, acknowledge and representing South Ashland neighborhood that feels very impacted. And I've seen more people out on the street homeless carrying their little ditty bags with them today than I have in weeks, like going one way or another looking for what the next stop is. So anyway, thank you, and just read the email. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jesse Carson Hamilton, Dennis Slattery, and then following them will be Daniel Quinn and Tam Masden.
Good evening. Excuse me. Good evening. I'm Jesse Carson Hamilton. These laws and ordinances that make camping illegal isn't the proper solution to homelessness. The side of the poverty-stricken has never been a pretty one. Homeless people are still citizens with needs, basic needs that aren't being met: food, water, shelter, and clothes. Also a necessity for every person to sleep. Without it, mania and poor choices manifest. By not allowing any person their basic needs affects their survival. With that causes desperation, which will cause more crime and violence in our community. The rich have seemed to have lost their humanity and replaced it with vanity. Sociology 101 will even prove that they use policy enforcers to discipline and oppress the poor. Like Abraham Lincoln said, any man can overcome adversity. To test a real man's character, give him power. What will the actions of the powerful say about their character after today? At the end of the day, we as residents have more similarities than we think. One of them is wanting better for our own families, housing, opportunity, and education. So let's get to know each other better through more community outreach. Let's put some understanding behind it instead of judgment. Now, every homeless person is addicted. Some are victims that fled abusive situations and unhealthy environments. Not all rich people are callous and cold. Not the whole group is responsible for the disrespect and disregard of the few. Let's be accurate and move with a purpose together.
Thank you.
Good evening. Dennis Slattery, Ashland, Oregon. And I want to echo the thank you for your service. I appreciate it and I respect it. I know it's not easy. And I appear here, by the way, not representing anybody other than myself. I've been impressed with the discussion. It's a full discussion. What I've been impressed with is there's a lot of uncertainty in and amongst this particular law, even among our legal people. And so I think that we need to focus on perhaps finding a better way of doing this. You not only hope that the city council will understand the ordinance that they're passing, and the police department will understand the ordinance they're passing, but the people that have to live by that ordinance. And right now, this ordinance just doesn't feel ready for prime time. I'm not an activist. Most of you know that. I'm a pragmatist. I want us to do things better and continue to grow on some of the things that we've managed to accomplish here. The biggest issue that I see with the ordinance, I come to support the idea that you put together a master planning commission and then ask you to set aside this ordinance to give the master planning committee some time to work on this. Ordinances, resources, those kind of things, those kind of things are a result of a planning process. This front loads that. This just feels premature. And I would ask you to reconsider, and we don't have to be in a big hurry. We can bring a community together to help a better planning process than we have right now.
Thank you. Daniel Quinn, Tam Masden will be followed by Trina Sanford and James Fox Bride.
Hi, my name is Dan Quinn from Ashland. I've been here about 3 years. I moved from Portland. Very specifically, I moved from Portland because I didn't feel it was a safe environment to raise my son, who is now 8 years old. It was very difficult to take him to playgrounds without being worried about primarily needles. There was playgrounds close to his school. They'd go do needle sweeps every morning. On top of that, there's, of course, the feces and other things. I'm not against homelessness. I think we should provide all the support we can to people that are unhoused. But I also think we need to look at all the vulnerable populations. And in my opinion, the most vulnerable population are children. And so when you're talking about enforcement zones and things like that around schools, I think you should take those very serious. So my son goes to the Siskiyou School. He's been there for 3 years. 2 years ago, when he was in first grade, we used to go to Clay Street Park 2 to 3 times a week, and multiple families would go there. After school is just a great way to let the kids unwind, get a lot of exercise. They also use that park during the school as a place for the kids to get exercise, but they're also stewards of the park. They would clean it up. They would do weeding and things like that, as well as keeping it clean. They can't do that anymore. And I'm not blaming all the houseless or homeless people for what's going on, but there is inherent issues that come with people that are unhoused. And that's not all of them, but there's issues that are associated with that. Things like drug abuse, paraphernalia, and sometimes filth. And it's really impacted the school and their ability to be kids and play in the playgrounds. So I definitely would ask you to take all the ordinances that are proposed that has to do with the use and restrictions around the parks very serious. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tam. I live here in Ashland. There's so much to say and so much to unpack, and I have 2 minutes. I just want to say that first doesn't feel great, that our voices everybody feels rushed in our time. I just want to say too that I feel the teammates that you guys really want to be here in this city. I heard your spiel about peace at the beginning, Mayor, and I'm really grateful to speak to humanity, speak to let's be more inclusive, less separating and dividing with each other. A lot of the comments coming from the new ordinance felt judgmental. It felt blatantly judgmental. So I just want to say that our voice will only get louder. We're not going to go away. So I quickly just want to say that I'm honored to share that I get to work with a new shelter here in town, and that something is really working. I get to witness miracles in humans who feel a sense of peace when they're resting, and a new sense of hope, new ideas, new inspiration, new feelings of worthiness, feeling included and belonging in our community. And what I will say now and over again is we all as humans deserve to feel worthy and that we belong and that we can just be. And it is, I'm not going to go fully into it, but it is ridiculous to say 2 hours here and there. All of it is just, we can do better. We can do better. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Our final 2 speakers this evening are Trina Sanford and James Foxbride.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Ms. Sanford, you're up next.
Me. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I'm Trina Sanford, and I've sent you an email already, so I'm hoping that you read it. I'm here again today seeking approval of this proposed camping ordinance. As it's been stated, the ordinance would provide clarity around what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior in our community. Even with the suggested edits that came to light tonight, this ordinance provides good direction. To ensure a safe, clean, and growing economy, this ordinance needs to be approved in an attempt to bring clarity and order to what is clearly an out-of-control situation.
To that end, I appreciate the work that has clearly gone into drafting this ordinance. As it's been stated
Ms.
tonight,
Sanford, if I can pause you for just a moment, let's stop her time. I want to remind the audience that the hand motions are only for things you support. Go ahead and give her 15 more seconds and carry on.
Okay. I can only imagine what's happening behind me.
Ms. Sanford, I just want to stop this proceeding for a moment. We have heard from a number of people who are opposed to this ordinance, and you have been listened to very respectfully by people who disagree with you. When we started this conversation, I was very clear that the hand motions were for things you support. What we need to do as a community is make sure that everyone who is sitting at these uncomfortable microphones understands that they are held in this conversation with respect. And what I can tell you, Ms. Sanford, is you've got a lot of hands waving behind that statement. So please carry on.
Well, I had more to say, but I'm going to end by saying that what I can only assume has happened behind me with gestures that probably are not so kind are probably the reason why I'm supporting this ordinance, because it's the same behavior that I experience in my community after I've cleaned up filth, needles, poop, and camps. So whatever just happened behind me, that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm asking for the approval of this ordinance.
Thank you.
Okay, my name is James Fox Bride. I've lived in Ashland for about 3 years. I first want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I know that it's very complicated and difficult to figure out what's best for the city of Ashland. I do think that if we're honest with ourselves, I don't think that any of us can say that there is adequate shelter available in Ashland right now. If I had nowhere to sleep indoors tonight, there is no place that I could show up and say, "Hi, I'm out in the cold, can I come inside and sleep?" There is no shelter available. There is nowhere that I could get into tonight if I needed to. There is a campground behind the police station that I have had several people tell me they felt very unsafe there and were not willing to stay because they felt that they were in danger. And I believe them. I do think that there's no way we could enforce an ordinance like this right now justifiably, because we do not have adequate shelter available for the people who need it. In addition, there are people who suffer from paranoia and anxiety, perhaps understandably from living in dangerous situations, sometimes for years and years. There are people who do not feel safe sleeping in the company of many other people around them, and so are not able to stay in traditional shelters or places like the campground behind the police station. And those people matter too. I don't want those people to die out in the cold. I don't want those people to feel that they are not wanted to survive in their communities. I want the people in our community to feel like they matter to each other and to us. I think that Bob Kaplan was starting to mention something in a sort of promising vein, almost perhaps unintentionally, listing out, okay, so what are the places where people might be able to camp given this ordinance? And perhaps that was based on a misunderstanding of how it was laid out, but I do think that there is room for expecting things from each other, for trying to be good neighbors in both directions, but for valuing the survival of our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilors, are there any further questions of staff? Councilor Bloom.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious if in terms of process, if some of that language has been changed so that that could be read back, so that way when we have discussion and debate on approval of this ordinance or not, we know that that's the framework we're going off of rather than any confusion.
What we are going to do at this point is I'm going to go around this circle and I'm going to ask all of the councilors to identify how they would like to move forward, cautioning that this is not a time to speak in support or against of this issue. It's simply to say, my hope is that this council does this. And what my hope is in this is that we can see if there is a common pathway forward. Otherwise, we are likely to end up with dueling motions and amendments and get tangled up in that process. So I'm hoping we can find a pathway. And whatever pathway that leads to, if it does go down that road where these changes that have been identified are required to be made, I'm sure that our legal team will help us move through that effort. So, Councillor Hanson, do you feel comfortable starting?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored. I'd like to thank all the staff and all the people that have came and the patience through this process. I'm reminded of the Latin phrase, nothing about us without us. And I believe we've said this before, I'll say it again, I would like to see this ordinance drafted with the participation of social services and the houseless community, as well as the business community and the residents that live in houses in South Ashland. So to move forward, I would like to see a collaborative effort to come out of a master plan and a task force. I would like to continue efforts in South Ashland to beef up patrols, to beef up outreach, to beef up the establishment of more shelter beds, like really focusing on community development and housing, and to bring in our partners from the county, from the state and the federal government to help us out, because our little community needs help. And in the meantime, we have a camping ordinance that I think is going to serve us well in the time being, and that's how I would like us to move forward.
Councillor Duquesne?
Okay, so we're not speaking pro or con.
Not pro or con, just simply what would you like to, what are you hoping to see this council do with this ordinance that's in front of us?
First off, I too appreciate everyone, all the emails, all the phone calls, all the texts, and everyone who's in here tonight and who's been here before. Looking at this, some interesting things have been, some suggestions have been made, and I don't want to run into this quickly. However, I don't feel as if we're running into it quickly. I too would like to see this Housing Master Plan Committee come together and be a community to look at all walks of life, housed, unhoused, business, everyone that's impacted by this ordinance. We have heard so much from our unhoused this evening, and also the last council meeting was filled with feelings and thoughts around this. So many people who live in South Ashland came last time and spilled their hearts out and their thoughts out and their feelings out. Everybody needs to be heard, and we all need to learn how to be good neighbors with each other and live together collaboratively. Ashland is not that big. I believe our number one
Councillor Duquesne, we need we're trying to get to the understanding of what would you like to see this council do this evening?
What I would like to see this council do this evening, then it is pro or con.
Well, what would you like to see us do?
I would actually like to hear from our legal team to make sure we have everything in order before I say what I would like to see us do. However, I think that it's important that what we do is collaboratively, because we have to live together. We have to learn to be good neighbors. And right now it kind of feels a little one-sided, but I believe we have to learn to be good neighbors. So I'd like to hear from our legal team first.
Okay, Councillor Kaplan?
Yes, I too would like to thank our staff, our legal team. You were, asked a lot of questions and, running through these things, and I know you put a lot of work into this, and I know you did it with the best of, motives and intents. I very much along the same lines as Councillor Hanson. I believe that, and former Councillor Slattery, I believe that the right order to do things is to, do the planning first,
and then have the policy come out of it and have the investments come out of it. That, we should have done the master plan last spring when we first started talking about it, and I think that I'm appreciative that this council was unanimous 2 sessions ago in asking the Housing and Human Services Committee to shepherd that process. I would like to see us take advantage of that process and table this until after we get that master plan done.
Thank you. Councillor Dale?
Thank you, Mayor. I can't imagine that there's anyone at this table, and even in this community, who wouldn't table this issue immediately if we could add to the agenda the item of how to solve housing right now. But that is still in process, and it is depressingly long process and extremely frustrating. That said, I feel that every day that goes by where we're not solving this in parallel with all of the potential tools that we can have is an opportunity missed for those that we were trying to assist the most. And while I understand and agree with my colleagues up here relative to process and a plan, I see no reason why, assuming that the legal team has this ready, that we can't proceed with both in parallel. Because I just can't imagine delaying because the status quo doesn't work right now.
Councillor Bloom?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll second that, and I'll also add that there's nothing that says that the homeless master plan cannot come back with recommendations to change this. It does not mean that the council cannot come back if we're seeing that there are elements that are not working and change those and amend those. What I would like to see us do is to move forward with this ordinance with the language changes. I'd be happy to hear amendments that my fellow councilors might have to this ordinance and that we take a vote on it. I think for too long we've been kicking the can down the road on a lot of issues.
Thank you,
and
Councillor.
It's time that we act.
Councillor Hyatt.
Thank you, Mayor. Nothing about this is easy. And I appreciate those who recognize that fact. With regard to forward process, we currently have an ordinance in place that is not in line with the Ninth Circuit, period. This entire body is open to the input of a collaborative process. Those two things are diametrically opposed. So where to next? I have spent weeks listening to those who challenge my views, those who agree with some of my views, and those that land in the middle. There are problems with our current ordinance. If we postpone, the problems with that ordinance stay. They are in place, and we are under them.
Councillor?
I am coming to it. I have not asked a lot of questions tonight on purpose. We can't rescind what's currently in place either. We have feedback from our community on both sides. Some want this in place yesterday. Some want more time. How do you balance that? We have children picking up things they have no business touching. They too need the protection. They need balance of access, just as our unhoused people do. That's why they're public spaces. I think we move forward, but we move forward with an element of collaboration. We put in place what legal has put in front of us for a period of time while the subcommittee of the HHS can bring forward their recommendation. That way, I'm not sitting here concerned that we're in violation of the Ninth Circuit and that I am not performing on my fiduciary duty to this city. And I am asking for time for this body, for our community, and for our partners to contribute to a better version. There is no perfect solution here tonight.
Exactly.
But that is my compromise.
Exactly. And with that, the floor is open for a motion.
Mayor, can
Councillor
we
Duquesne.
hear from
Um,
Can we hear from our legal?
what is your particular question?
I just wanted to have the ordinance read back to us because of the amendments that were made.
We don't have any amendments to it yet. That would be in a motion.
Okay. Well,
so we will get to that if there's a motion to move forward with the ordinance tonight.
Okay.
I'm happy to make a motion.
Bloom.
Thank you. I move to approve first reading of ordinance number 3228, an ordinance relating to prohibitive camping and prohibitive occupancy, amending AMC Chapter 10.46.020 and AMC 10.46.030, and setting it to a second reading.
Second.
Councilor Bloom?
We've had a lot of discussion. I know that we are running out of time. I would certainly like to have it read back with some of those language changes. And, I concur that we can come back and we can make different changes to this at a later date. If people have amendments that they would like to make, I'm certainly, I will entertain those, but we need to move this forward.
Councilor Bale.
Okay. Cut me off at any time, please, Mayor. I cannot imagine that there is anyone in this community that does not desire to have every single individual provided with stable housing as well as basic and necessary needs, preferably much more. Every day that goes by without positive action is an opportunity missed to help the very people we are saying we want to assist. I see no reason why those that would like to continue to have planning sessions prior to any action on this ordinance cannot do mindfully and in parallel with an urgently needed update to our current regulatory structure that is clearly outdated and not aligned with current court rulings as evidenced tonight. I fully support those efforts. This proposed ordinance is not perfect, but neither is it set in stone. Like all ordinances, the process is in place to update it with better tools when they become available, and I trust the system. It is my opinion that we may unintentionally be confusing or specifically conflating housing status or condition with that of behavior. Behavior, as well as basic, fundamental, and positive actions for the benefit of all, are to be expected from everyone. And Mayor, I will send this out to each and every person here because I could go on and I understand the interest of time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other
Mayor.
comments? Yes, Councilor
Thank you. I'll be quick. Something that I did want to reiterate is that this is a living document. So once it is in place here tonight, if it were to pass, that I'm putting a lot of faith and hope into our Housing Master Plan Committee. And I would like to see what we mentioned before, unhoused people, all the voices at the table. But this is a living document, and it can be amended.
Councilor Bloom, in terms of your motion, we did have the two areas we had identified. Maybe back to our legal staff is now the time to read that. I realize that there's additional comments, but I want to make sure that this is on the record that I'm assuming that your motion includes these two elements. So can you read that amended language back? And then I'll come back to you, Councilor Hanson.
Yeah, and if I may chime in first, for the section D, so on page 6 with the apparent value, where I said it actually made sense to have it just be property, I want to go back to my original thinking, and I believe that the language that it is now is appropriate because it's saying we will take anything that is not of apparent value. So the definition accounts for anything of basic needs that we specifically make sure that we do not take those. So I actually suggest keeping the language as it is for that reason.
Right. The change that I believe was suggested was in the definitions or the those particular places of exception, and that would be exceptions to the prohibited camping. 10.46.020, we are at C and 2, which would be regardless of exceptions. At B, camping is prohibited under any circumstances in Lithia Park and parks with, and I said recreational equipment. That would be one change. The change to 10.46.030 was sleeping in benches, it would be prohibited occupancy. I would say that no person shall occupy street furniture or a public area of 50 square feet or greater for more than 2 hours during daytime hours between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Property owned by the violator shall be subject to the removal process in 10.46.040. And I believe your language would then remain the same.
Is that acceptable to you, Councillor Bloom?
It is, thank you.
Councillor Hanson.
Thank you. Yeah, 2 comments. I've been reminded recently of some wise words that were posed here in this chambers, which is that ordinances are created slowly for a reason. They're hard to undo. And although I recognize that our current camping ordinance isn't in compliance with the Ninth Circuit, I am not convinced that the proposed camping ordinance is in compliance with the Ninth Circuit. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Any further discussion, Councillor Kaplan?
Yeah. So I think as we've made very clear here, our current ordinance already bans camping in all parks and playgrounds, all rights of way, under bridges and viaducts, and on sidewalks, business fronts, streets, alleys, and lanes. And our police can enforce this ordinance as long as we have designated space or shelter. That's been very clearly stated. That is in compliance with the Ninth Circuit and with the state law as far as I understand it. So I don't think that it is precisely accurate to say that it is urgent to change our ordinance in order to comply with jurisprudence or state law. It is in compliance. We have the time to do it right. I agree that there are elements of this the current camping ordinance that could be improved. There are lots of clarifications that could be made that would make it clearer for everybody. But I'm not in favor of an approach that has a negative list of places where people have to try to figure out where to go if they can't get into a shelter.
No speaking from the audience. Carry on, Councillor Kaplan.
I'm not in favor of an ordinance that's written with a negative list like this. That's the addition, a major addition to this, of places where people can't go. It's much better to help people, to point people to where they can go. It's simpler, it's clearer, it's more humane, it's more enforceable. I think everything about it. So I think the approach is wrong, and I think that we've got this cart before the horse. We should be letting our master plan guide us in this, with all the voices in the room and in the city. I have confidence in that process to really bring this back to us when it's really ready for prime time, as to borrow the words from one of the speakers during the public hearing. So this council asked the Housing and Human Services Committee to come back with a master plan. Frankly, it seems like a bit of a we heard, we asked the committee to come back to shepherd a master planning process. I have faith in that committee to do it. I think it shows a lack of confidence in that committee to go forward with this ordinance as it is right now. It's just not ready for prime time. So I'm going to vote against this.
Councillor Hyatt.
In the interest of time, I'll pass on my comments, but I want to make absolutely sure that this body does in fact give the direction to the Housing Committee to do this work, because this ordinance currently, as the conversation stands, is not included in a charge that I'm aware of. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
You're correct.
So to that point, I would like to amend this motion, if I may.
Yes.
Or are we too short?
We have one required item after this that must be in play by 9:30.
I'll hold it.
And is this a question, Councillor? You've already spoken to the motion. Okay. Roll call, please, Alyssa.
Hyatt?
Yes.
Bloom?
Yes.
Dale?
Yes.
Kaplan?
No.
Duquesne?
Yes.
Hanson?
No.
Motion pass.
Thank you.
Mayor, may I please quickly?
Yes.
I would like to move that we send this ordinance, as it currently has been advanced, to the subcommittee of the Housing and Human Services Committee for review and for their recommendations within 6 months.
I'll second that.
Would you care to speak to your motion?
No, said enough.
Councillor Bloom?
Yeah, I know where the Housing and Human Services Committee stands on this ordinance, or at least a vast majority of them, and I know that we need to do this work. My big concern is that it's going to take a year, so I'm happy to say 6 months deadline. Thank you.
Any further discussion?
I support that.
Roll call, please, Alyssa.
Hanson?
Sorry, I really don't know exactly what I'm voting on precisely.
Do you have a specific question for Councillor Hyatt?
So the body just voted this in.
Yes.
We advanced it to second reading, and I'm saying with the advancement to second reading, with it, I want that collaborative process.
Okay.
And I'm putting a timeline on that
I'm
process
good with
as
that.
well.
Yep.
Okay.
Alyssa? Yes.
Duquesne?
Yes.
Kaplan?
Maybe that's, yeah, okay.
Yes.
Dale?
Yes.
Bloom?
Yes.
Hyatt?
Yes.
Motion pass.
Thank you. We have one item under ordinances, resolutions, and contracts that is time limited this evening. It is the sole source procurement wastewater membranes. Scott? Yes. Please let Scott through. So Scott, we will need to get a motion on the floor before 9:30.
Questions? I read through the packet.
Yes, if I could have attention, please. We need quiet in the chambers. Questions for Scott regarding this?
I went through it. I have no questions, and I'm happy to make a motion.
Are there any questions for Scott? Okay, Scott, we do have a couple of minutes, so just for the benefit of the folks at home, can you give us a brief overview of what we're voting on?
So before the council is a request to authorize a sole source procurement for membrane filtration systems for replacement of the existing membrane filtration system components at the wastewater treatment plant. It's a sole source procurement because only Veolia Water Technologies provides the membranes that fit and work within our existing system. And so that's the request for council to authorize that sole source procurement. And then from the financial standpoint, since the last membrane train was replaced, we've been putting money in the equipment fund to fund the replacement on a life cycle schedule. And so the money exists, the 1.4 million exists in the equipment fund to fully fund the replacement of these membrane trains. And we're talking about 2 of the 4 membrane trains to be replaced. Upon approval, there's about a 6 to 8 month lead time before we will actually get them here and start to install them in the system.
Great question.
Councillor Hyatt?
May I make a motion?
Yes, you may. Or as long as there are no other questions. Do you have a question, Councillor?
Yes.
Councillor Duquesne.
So Scott, did I hear you correctly say that what you have the money set aside will pay for it in full, both of them, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Councillor Hyatt.
I move council acting as contract review board approve the sole source purchase with Veolia Water Technologies Solutions in the amount of $1,477,645 and authorize the city manager to sign the contractual agreement.
Second.
Councillor Hyatt?
Good.
Councillor Bloom?
No.
Any further discussion?
No.
No, Councillor? Roll call, please, Alyssa.
Dale?
Yes.
Kaplan?
Yes.
Duquesne?
Yes.
Hanson?
Yes.
Hyatt?
Yes.
Bloom?
Yes.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes. Councillor, I'm going to put it back to Sabrina.
Please, Scott. Can you get through your right away?
I could try.
Okay.
So before the council's a request to initiate the vacation of two sections of right-of-way, I'll combine them into one. Under ORS 271, the council can initiate the vacation of right-of-way process. One is for a street plug on Mountain Meadows Drive, and one is for an unimproved section of Fern Street that connects Elkader to South Mountain. Both these have been in the works on the staff side for some time. And so the request is for the council to authorize and initiate the process, of which we would follow ORS 271 and the existing municipal code for vacating those two portions of right-of-way.
Are there any questions?
Can I make a motion to extend 10 minutes?
What we would need to do is just get a motion on the floor. What I will do to adjust the process is, if we can get a motion on the floor, I will allow us to continue to ask staff questions. Do I have a single motion that covers both elements? Councillor Kaplan?
Yes, I move to begin the process to vacate a portion of the public right-of-way on Mountain Meadows Way and Fern Street as allowed by ORS 271.130, and then follow Ashland Municipal Code 14.18.
I'll second.
Okay, so we are going to go back to the question section. Are there any additional questions for staff? Councillor Duquesne?
Scott, if I remember correctly, this does not have an impact, a fiscal impact on the city. The owners pay for the property.
The only fiscal impact is my staff time to process it and planning staff through the planning commission. The owners pay for the survey documents, the deeds of record. They pay for the recording fees and that process that happens behind the scenes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Any additional questions for staff? No?
Mayor?
Yes.
Since we're graced with another couple minutes, I was curious, are there already curb cuts there? Do we have to go back and do work to repair and restore?
Which component, Fern Street or Mountain Meadows?
Yes.
Fern Street is actually acts as a driveway to the residents that access off of Elkader, so there would be no functional work required of the city at that location. The location of Mountain Meadows accesses a private drive for the existing development there, so there would be no work associated with that component from the city standpoint and an infrastructure basis.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay, any comments or discussion? Roll call, please, Alyssa.
Hyatt,
Yes.
Bloom,
Yes.
Dale,
Yes.
Kaplan,
Yes.
Duquesne,
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. And with that, we will adjourn. Meeting is adjourned. Safe travels home, everyone.